Good evening, class. How's everybody doing today? I hope you are all well. Do let me know if the background music is a little too loud. I can always turn that down. It's just there to be something nice in the background while we have our story time tonight. And I realize it's been a little while since I've done a reading stream. I greatly enjoy them, and I particularly enjoy Sherlock Holmes, which is what we'll be continuing with tonight. Now, my previous Sherlock Holmes streams, I read through the entirety of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which are the original 12 short stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So I figured, why not continue with the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes? Doyle's original stories were so popular that he ended up writing more. He didn't really expect to, but there was humongous public demand. So between 1893 and 1894, another 12 stories were published, much as they were the first time, featuring the illustrations of Sidney... what's his name? I'm blanking. Oh, you would think I would remember this. Oh, Sidney Paget. That's it. Very famous illustrator, responsible for the iconic look of Holmes that we all kind of have in our minds. It was a lot of fun. You know, it's kind of fun to think that this character has been wildly popular with the public since his introduction, since he was introduced in the late 19th century. And pretty much ever since, Sherlock Holmes has been iterated on, made into radio dramas, stage plays, tons of different movies, spin-off TV series, lots of video games actually, since the early 1980s. Holmes has been a popular subject for video games, starting with text adventures and later point-and-click titles, even appearing in the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney series spin-off, The Great Ace Attorney, although rather in a more parodied form. So it's a character that's been in the public consciousness for a very, very long time. But what I think you'll find is that all of the stories are still really, really entertaining. And the language is not so archaic as to be difficult to read. You just need to go a little slowly, which is why I think they make for very fun story times. You know, having someone else read you the story makes it a little easier to understand. At least I feel that way. So before we begin, if you'll excuse me for a moment, I need to put on a different hat. Oh, not quite. There we go. Now I am properly attired. I am wearing my deerstalker cap and ready for some nice story time. I hope you all are as well. Now, I've turned off my usual karaoke redeem just because I don't want to really interrupt. Oh, good evening, never gonna give you up. Wonderful to see you here. Yes, I have donned my Holmes cap tonight and am ready for Sherlock Holmes. I love that. So the reason he is Herlock instead of Sherlock in the US localization of The Great Ace Attorney comes down to there still being one or two Sherlock Holmes stories that are not yet public domain. So I think legally you have to change his name. I believe in the Japanese version of Great Ace Attorney, he's just Sherlock Holmes. Also good to see you, Nicolas Cage. Why don't I, however, bring out the book? There we go. Do let me know if the text is the right size, too large, too small. Let me know. I figure the stories on average take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour to read. So I will probably read 2 or 3 stories tonight, so I implore you, sit back, relax. You know, if it's cold, grab a blanket. If it's warm and nice out, crack open the window, grab your drink of choice. I've got the remnants of an iced coffee here that it's probably too late in the day to be drinking, but oh well. I'm going to go ahead and caffeinate a little bit more anyways. Why don't we begin the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes? Now, class, I may ask you for feedback on character voices. If you would like a voice to be maybe a little more silly, do just let me know. I'm happy to give it my best attempt. Let us begin with the Silver Blaze. "I am afraid, Watson, that I shall have to go," said Holmes as we sat down together to our breakfast one morning. "Go? Where to?" "To Dartmoor, the King's Pyland." I was not surprised. Indeed, my only wonder was that he had not already been mixed up in this extraordinary case, which was the one topic of conversation through the length and breadth of England. For a whole day, my companion had rambled about the room with his chin upon his chest and his brows knitted, charging and recharging his pipe with the strongest black tobacco, and absolutely deaf to any of my questions or remarks. "Hey, howdy, A4 Honest Abe. Welcome in. Thank you for joining for some story time here. We are beginning the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes with the... don't know if it's the Adventure of the Silver Blaze or the Case of the Silver Blaze, or just Silver Blaze, but I think you'll find that this story is familiar. Fresh editions of every paper had been sent up by our news agent, only to be glanced over and tossed down into a corner. Yet, silent as he was, I knew perfectly well what it was over which he was brooding. There was but one problem before the public which could challenge his powers of analysis, and that was the singular disappearance of the favourite for the Wessex Cup and the tragic murder of its trainer. When, therefore, he suddenly announced his intention of setting out for the scene of the drama, it was only what I had both expected and hoped for. "I should be most happy to go down with you if I should not be in the way," said I. "My dear Watson, you would confer a great favour upon me by coming, and I think that your time will not be misspent, for there are points about the case which promise to make it an absolutely unique one. We have, I think, just time to catch our train at Paddington, and I will go further into the matter upon our journey. You would oblige me by bringing you your very excellent field glass." And so it happened that an hour later or so I found myself in the corner of a first-class carriage flying along en route for Exeter, while Sherlock Holmes, with his sharp, eager face framed in his ear-flapped travelling cap, dipped rapidly into the bundle of fresh papers which he had procured at Paddington. We had left Reading far behind us before he thrust the last one of them under the seat, and offered me his cigar case. "We are going well," said he, looking out the window and glancing at his watch. "Our rate at present is 53.5 miles an hour." "I have not observed the quarter-mile posts," said I. "Nor have I, but the telegraph posts upon this line are 60 yards apart, and the calculation is a simple one. I presume that you have looked into this matter of the murder of John Straker and the disappearance of the Silver Blaze?" "I have seen what the Telegraph and the Chronicle have to say." "It is one of those cases where the art of the reasoner should be used rather for the sifting of details than for the acquiring of fresh evidence. The tragedy has been so uncommon, so complete, and of such personal importance to so many people that we are suffering from a plethora of surmise, conjecture, and hypothesis. The difficulty is to detach the framework of fact, of absolute, undeniable fact, from the embellishments of theorists and reporters. Then, having established ourselves upon this sound basis, it is our duty to see what inferences may be drawn, and what are the special points upon which the whole mystery turns. On Tuesday evening I received telegrams from both Colonel Ross, the owner of the horse, and from Inspector Gregory, who is looking after the case, inviting my cooperation." "Tuesday evening!" I exclaimed. "And this is Thursday morning. Why didn't you go down yesterday?" "Because I made a blunder, my dear Watson, which is, I am afraid, a more common occurrence than anyone would think who only knew me through your memoirs. The fact is that I could not believe it possible that the most remarkable horse in England could remain long concealed, especially in so sparsely inhabited a place as the north of Dartmoor. From hour to hour yesterday I expected to hear that he had been found, and that his abductor was the murderer of John Straker. When, however, another morning had come, and I found that beyond the arrest of young Fitzroy Simpson nothing had been done, I felt that it was time for me to take action. Yet in some ways I feel that yesterday has not been wasted. You have formed a theory, then? At least I have got a grip of the essential facts of the case. I shall enumerate them to you, for nothing clears up a case so much as stating it to another person, and I can hardly expect your cooperation if I do not show you the position from which we start. I lay back against the cushions, puffing at my cigar, while Holmes, leaning forward with his long, thin forefinger checking off the points upon the palm of his left hand, gave me a sketch of the events which had led to our journey. Silver Blaze, said he, is from the Isonomy stock, and holds as brilliant a record as his famous ancestor. He is now in his 5th year, and has brought in turn each of the prizes of the turf to Colonel Ross, his fortunate owner. Up to the time of the catastrophe, he was the first favourite for the Wessex Cup, the betting being 3-1 on him. He has always, however, been a prime favourite with the racing public, and he has never yet disappointed them, so that even at those odds enormous sums of money have been laid upon him. It is obvious, therefore, that there were many people who had the strongest interest in preventing Silver Blaze from being there at the fall of the flag next Tuesday. The fact was, of course, appreciated at King's Pyland, where the Colonel's training stable is situated. Every precaution was taken to guard the favourite. The trainer, John Straker, is a retired jockey who rode in Colonel Ross's colours before he became too heavy for the weighing chair. He has served the Colonel for 5 years as jockey and for 7 as trainer, and has always shown himself to be a zealous and honest servant. Under him were 3 lads, for the establishment was a small one, containing only 4 horses in all. One of these lads sat up each night in the stable, while the others slept in the loft. All 3 bore excellent characters. John Straker, who is a married man, lived in a small villa about 200 yards from the stables. He has no children, keeps 1 maidservant, and is comfortably off. The country round is very lovely, but about half a mile to the north there is a small cluster of villas which have been built by a Tavistock contractor for the use of invalids and others who may wish to enjoy the pure Dartmoor air. Tavistock itself lies 2 miles to the west, while across the moor, which is about 2 miles distant, is the larger training establishment of Mapleton, which belongs to Lord Backwater and is managed by Silas Brown. In every other direction the moor is a complete wilderness, inhabited only by a few roaming gypsies. Such was the general situation last Monday night when the catastrophe occurred. On that evening, the horses had been exercised and watered as usual, and the stables were locked up at 9 o'clock. 2 of the lads walked up to the trainer's house, where they had supper in the kitchen, while the third, Ned Hunter, remained on guard. At a few minutes after 9, the maid, Edith Baxter, carried down to the stables his supper, which consisted of a dish of curried mutton. She took no liquid, as there was a water tap in the stables, and it was the rule that the lad on duty should drink nothing else. The maid carried a lantern with her, as it was very dark and the path ran across the open moor. Edith Baxter was within 30 yards of the stables when a man appeared out of the darkness and called to her to stop. As he stepped into the circle of yellow light thrown by the lantern, she saw that he was a person of gentlemanly bearing, dressed in a grey suit of tweeds with a cloth cap. He wore gaiters and carried a heavy stick with a knob to it. She was most impressed, however, by the extreme pallor of his face and by the nervousness of his manner. His age, she thought, would be rather over 30 than under it. "Can you tell me where I am?" he asked. "I had almost made up my mind to sleep on the moor when I saw the light of your lantern." "You are close to the King Pyland's training stables," said she. "Oh, indeed, what a stroke of luck!" he cried. "I understand that a stable boy sleeps there alone every night. Perhaps that is his supper which you are carrying to him. Now I am sure that you would not be too proud to earn the price of a new dress, would you?" He took a piece of white paper folded up out of his waistcoat pocket. "See that the boy has this tonight, and you shall have the prettiest frock that money can buy." She was frightened by the earnestness of his manner, and ran past him to the window through which she was accustomed to hand the meals. It was already opened, and Hunter was seated at the small table inside. She had begun to tell him of what had happened when the stranger came up again. "Good evening," said he, looking through the window. "I wanted to have a word with you." The girl has sworn that as he spoke she noticed the corner of the little paper packet protruding from his closed hand. "What business have you here?" asked the lad. "It's business that may put something into your pocket," said the other. "You've 2 horses in for the Wessex Cup, Silver Blaze and Bayard. Let me have the straight tip and you won't be a loser. Is it a fact that at the weights Bayard could give the other 100 yards in 5 furlongs, and that the stable have put their money on him?" "So you're one of those damned touts!" cried the lad. "I'll show you how we serve 'em in King's Pyland." He sprang up and rushed across the stable to unloose the dog. The girl fled away to the house, but as she ran she looked back and saw that the stranger was leaning through the window. A minute later, however, when Hunter rushed out with the hound, he was gone, and though he ran all round the buildings, he failed to find any trace of him. "One moment," I asked. "Did the stable boy, when he ran out with the dog, leave the door unlocked behind him?" "Excellent, Watson, excellent," murmured my companion. "The importance of the point struck me so forcibly that I sent a special wire to Dartmoor yesterday to clear the matter up. The boy locked the door before he left it. The window, I may add, was not large enough for a man to get through." Hunter waited until his fellow grooms had returned, when he sent a message to the trainer and told him what had occurred. Straker was excited at hearing the account, although he does not seem to have quite realized its true significance. It left him, however, vaguely uneasy, and Mrs. Straker, waking at 1 in the morning, found that he was dressing. In reply to her inquiries, he said that he could not sleep on account of his anxiety about the horses, and that he intended to walk down to the stables to see that all was well. She begged him to remain at home, as she could hear the rain pattering against the window, but in spite of her entreaties he pulled on his large mackintosh and left the house. Mrs. Straker awoke at 7 in the morning to find that her husband had not yet returned. She dressed herself hastily, called the maid, and set off for the stables. The door was open inside. Huddled together upon a chair, Hunter was sunk in a state of absolute stupor. The favourite stall was empty, and there were no signs of his trainer. The 2 lads who slept in the chaff-cutting loft above the harness room were quickly aroused. They had heard nothing during the night, for they are both sound sleepers. Hunter was obviously under the influence of some powerful drug, and as no sense could be got out of him, he was left to sleep it off while the 2 lads and the 2 women ran out in search of the absentees. They still had hopes that the trainer had for some reason taken out the horse for early exercise, but on ascending the knoll near the house, from which all the neighbouring moors were visible, they not only could see no signs of the missing favourite, but they perceived something which warned them that they were in the presence of a tragedy. About 1/4 of a mile from the stables, John Straker's overcoat was flapping from a furze bush. Immediately beyond there was a bowl-shaped depression in the moor, and at the bottom of this was found the dead body of the unfortunate trainer. His head had been shattered by a savage blow from some heavy weapon, and he was wounded on the thigh, where there was a long, clean cut, inflicted evidently by some very sharp instrument. It was clear, however, that Straker had defended himself vigorously against his assailants, for in his right hand he held a small knife, which was clotted with blood up to the handle, while in his left he clasped a red and black silk cravat, which was recognized by the maid as having been worn on the preceding evening by the stranger who had visited the stables. Hunter, on recovering from his stupor, was also quite positive as to the ownership of the cravat. He was equally certain that the same stranger had, while standing at the window, drugged his curried mutton and so deprived the stables of their watchman. As to the missing horse, there were abundant proofs in the mud which lay at the bottom of the fatal hollow that he had been there at the time of the struggle. But from that morning he has disappeared. That's a bit loud, sorry. There we go. As to the missing horse, there were abundant proofs in the mud which lay at the bottom of the fatal hollow that he had been there at the time of the struggle. But from that morning he has disappeared, and although a large reward has been offered, and all the gypsies of Dartmoor are on the alert, no news has come of him. Finally, an analysis has shown that the remains of his supper left by the stable lad contain an appreciable quantity of powdered opium, while the people at the house partook of the same dish on the same night without any ill effects. These are the main facts of the case, stripped of all surmise, and stated as baldly as possible. I shall now recapitulate what the police have done in the matter. Inspector Gregory, to whom the case has been committed, is an extremely competent officer. Were he but gifted with imagination, he might rise to great heights in his profession. On his arrival, he promptly found and arrested the man upon whom suspicion naturally rested. There was little difficulty in finding him, for he inhabited one of those villas which I have mentioned. His name, it appears, was Fitzroy Simpson. He was a man of excellent birth and education, who had squandered a fortune upon the turf, and who lived now by doing a little quiet and genteel bookmaking in the sporting clubs of London. An examination of his betting book shows that bets to the amount of £5,000 had been registered by him against the favourite. On being arrested, he volunteered the statement that he had come down to Dartmoor in the hope of getting some information about the King's Pyland horses, and also about Desborough, the second favourite, which was in charge of Silas Brown at the Mapleton stables. He did not attempt to deny that he had acted as described upon the evening before, but declared that he had no sinister designs, and had simply wished to obtain first-hand information. When confronted with his cravat, he turned very pale, and was utterly unable to account for its presence in the hand of the murdered man. His wet clothing showed that he had been out in the storm of the night before, and his stick, which was a Penang lawyer weighted with lead, was just such a weapon as might, by repeated blows, have inflicted the terrible injuries to which the trainer had succumbed. On the other hand, there was no wound upon his person, while the state of Straker's knife would show that at least one of his assailants must bear his mark upon him. There you have it all in a nutshell, Watson, and if you can give me any light I shall be infinitely obliged to you. I had listened with the greatest interest to the statement which Holmes, with characteristic clearness, had laid before me. Though most of the facts were familiar to me, I had not sufficiently appreciated their relative importance, nor their connection to each other. Is it not possible, I suggested, that the incised wound upon Straker may have been caused by his own knife in the convulsive struggles which follow any brain injury? It is more than possible, it is probable, said Holmes. In that case, one of the main points in favor of the accused disappears. And yet, said I, even now I fail to understand what the theory of the police can be. I am afraid that whatever theory we state has very grave objections to it, returned my companion. The police imagine, I take it, that this Fitzroy Simpson, having drugged the lad, and having in some way obtained a duplicate key, opened the stable door and took out the horse, with the intention apparently of kidnapping him altogether. His bridle is missing, so that Simpson must have put this on. Then, having the door left open behind him, he was leading the horse away over the moor when he was either met or overtaken by the trainer. A row naturally ensued. Simpson beat out the trainer's brains with his heavy stick without receiving any injury from the small knife which Straker used in self-defense, and then the thief either led the horse on to some secret hiding place, or else it may have bolted during the struggle and be now wandering out on the moors. That is the case as it appears to the police, and improbable as it is, all other explanations are more improbable still. However, I shall quickly test the matter when I am once upon the spot, and until then I cannot really see how we can get much further than our present position. It was evening before we reached the little town of Tavistock, which lies, like the boss of a shield, in the middle of the huge circle of Dartmoor. 2 gentlemen were awaiting us in the station, the one a tall, fair man with lion-like hair and beard and curiously penetrating light blue eyes, the other a small, alert person, very neat and dapper, in a frock coat and gaiters, with trim little side whiskers and an eyeglass. The latter was Colonel Ross, the well-known sportsman, the other, Inspector Gregory, a man who was rapidly making his name in the English detective service. Oh, did you really, ZSX? I'm very happy to hear that. Hey, Hardcore Hunter, welcome. Yes, we are in the middle of the case of the Silver Blaze. It is one of the best-known Sherlock Holmes stories. I do as well. Oh, my dear stalker gets gets a little wonky if I look a bit too off. But yes, Holmes and Watson have just arrived at Tavistock, in the middle of Dartmoor. They're going to interview Colonel Ross and try to figure out who has murdered John Straker and stolen the racehorse Silver Blaze. Will they figure out the mystery? Let us find out. Ooh, what kind of voice should Colonel Ross have? Hello, Coyote Knight. Oh, yeah, detective stories are great. Sherlock Holmes is great. The Father Brown stories by G.K. Chesterton are great. If we're talking, old detective stories. There's a lot. Let's see. Colonel Ross is a little older, so let's go with a, I am delighted that you have come down, Mr. Holmes, said the Colonel. The inspector here has done all that could possibly be suggested, but I wish to leave no stone unturned in trying to avenge poor Straker and in recovering my horse. Have there been any fresh developments? Asked Holmes. I am sorry to... Oh, this is the inspector. Let's see. Let's go with a gruffer voice for the inspector. I am sorry to say that we've made very little progress, said the inspector. We have an open carriage outside, and as you would no doubt like to see the place before the light falls, we might talk it over as we drive. A minute later, we were all seated in a comfortable landau, and we were rattling through the quaint old Devonshire city. Inspector Gregory was full of his case and poured out a stream of remarks, while Holmes threw in an occasional question or interjection. Colonel Ross leaned back with his arms folded and his hat tilted over his eyes, while I listened with interest to the dialogue of the two detectives. Gregory was formulating his theory, which was almost exactly what Holmes had foretold in the train. The net is drawn pretty close round Fitzroy Simpson, he remarked, and I believe myself that he is our man. At the same time, I recognize that the evidence is purely circumstantial, and that some new development may upset it. How about Straker's knife? We have quite come to the conclusion that he wounded himself in his fall. My friend Dr. Watson made that suggestion to me as we came down. If so, it would tell against this man Simpson. Hold on, class. My boom microphone has just fallen down. I caught it, but I need to reattach it to my desk. Hold on one moment. There we go. My microphone arm fell down entirely and I had to catch it, but I didn't want to stop reading. Oh yeah, Poe's settings are wonderful, and he wrote quite a number of detective stories as well. Let's see. Ah yes, it would tell against this man Simpson. Undoubtedly, he has neither a knife nor any sign of a wound. The evidence against him is currently very strong. He had a great interest in the disappearance of the favourite. He lies under suspicion of having poisoned the stable boy. He was undoubtedly out in the storm, and he was armed with a heavy stick, and his cravat was found in the dead man's hand. I really think we have enough to go before a jury. Ooh, I've read that on stream before. ZSX, it's wonderful. Hello, Blush Cookie. Telltale Heart is a great one. I foamed, I raved. Let's see, Inspector Gregory has laid out the case. Holmes shook his head. A clever counsel would tear it all to rags, said he. Why should he take the horse out of the stable? If he wished to injure it, why could he not do it there? Has a duplicate key been found in his possession? What chemist sold him the powdered opium? Above all, where could he, a stranger to the district, hide a horse, and such a horse as this? What is his own explanation as to the paper which he wished the maid to give the stable boy? He says it was a £10 note. One was found in his purse. But your other difficulties are not so formidable as they seem. He is not a stranger to the district. He has twice lodged at Tavistock in the summer. The opium was probably brought from London. The key, having served its purpose, would be hurled away. The horse may be at the bottom of one of the pits or old mines upon the moor. What does he say about the cravat? He acknowledges that it is his, and declares that he had lost it. But a new element has been introduced into the case which may account for his leading the horse from the stable. Holmes pricked up his ears. We have found traces which show that a party of gypsies encamped on Monday night within a mile of the spot where the murder took place. On Tuesday they were gone. Now, presuming that there was some understanding between Simpson and these gypsies, might he not have been leading the horse to them when he was overtaken, and may they not have him now? It is certainly possible. The moor is being scoured for these gypsies. I have also examined every stable and outhouse in Tavistock and for a radius of 10 miles. There is another training stable quite close, I understand. Yes, and that is a factor which we must certainly not neglect. As Desborough, their horse, was second in the betting, they had an interest in the disappearance of the favourite. Silas Brown, the trainer, is known to have had large bets upon the event, and he was no friend to poor Straker. We have, however, examined the stables, and there is nothing to connect him with the affair. And nothing to connect this man Simpson with the interests of the Mapleton stables? Nothing at all. Holmes leaned back in the carriage, and the conversation ceased. A few minutes later, our driver pulled up at a neat little red brick villa with overhanging eaves which stood by the road. Some distance off, across a paddock, lay a long, grey tiled outbuilding. In every other direction, the low curves of the moor, bronze-colored from the fading ferns, stretched away to the skyline, broken only by the steeples of Tavistock, and by a cluster of houses away to the westward which marked the Mapleton stables. We all sprang out with the exception of Holmes, who continued to lean back with his eyes fixed upon the sky in front of him, entirely absorbed in his own thoughts. It was only when I touched his arm that he roused himself with a violent start and stepped out of the carriage. "Excuse me," said he, turning to Colonel Ross, who had looked at him in some surprise. "I was daydreaming." There was a gleam in his eyes and a suppressed excitement in his manner which convinced me, used as I was to his ways, that his hand was upon a clue, though I could not imagine where he had found it. "Perhaps you would prefer at once to go on to the scene of the crime, Mr. Holmes?" said Gregory. "I think that I should prefer to stay here a little and go into one or two questions of detail. Straker was brought back here, I presume?" "Yes, he lies upstairs. The inquest is tomorrow." "He has been in your service some years, Colonel Ross?" "I have always found him an excellent servant." "I presume that you made an inventory of what he had in his pockets at the time of his death, Inspector?" "I have the things themselves in the sitting room if you would care to see them." "Yes, these are all written from Watson's Perspectives ESX. The conceit of the stories is that Watson has written these memoirs as a record of his own time with Holmes. So whenever we're outside of quotation marks, whenever there's narration, it's from Watson's point of view. But this back and forth here. Inspector Gregory has just asked Holmes if he would like to see what Straker had in his pockets. Also, I apologize for the really quite terrible British accent. For Holmes and Watson, I go for a more, what we would call mid-Atlantic accent. That thing that actors did like the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where they tried to sound neither like Americans nor like Brits. But somewhere in between, mid-Atlantic, somewhere in the middle of, those two accents. Which is a little strange, but it was a thing for quite some time, for quite some decades. Actors were trained in that style of speech. I feel like I probably sound fairly distinctly American, but when I go for Holmes, I go for something a little more like, "I presume that you made an inventory of what he had in his pockets at the time of his death, Inspector?" Which isn't a British accent, but I'm trying to sound less American, if that makes any sense. Yeah, a very light London. I've been to the UK a couple times. I've been to London, I've been to Manchester, I've been to Leeds. and then some smaller towns in Yorkshire when I was in Leeds. And the accents vary wildly. I've also been to Wales, which the Welsh accent is another world entirely that I cannot even come close to approximating. So I'm not trying necessarily to do a British accent, but something a little bit in between that makes for, more interesting than if I was just reading it in my normal voice. Yeah, I think because London is such an international city, that there's so many accents even within London. But I think kind of because its place is a, international hub of culture, it's taken on this different sound entirely. I have a fairly neutral American accent as far as things go. It's not, like a New York accent or a Boston accent or a Californian accent. I try to keep it as neutral as I can to be clearly understandable. Hey, Nanara, welcome. Alright, let us see what Holmes finds. I should be very glad. We all filed into the front room and sat round the central table while the inspector unlocked a square tin box and laid a small heap of things before us. There was a box of Vestas, 2 inches of tallow candle, an ADP briar root pipe, a pouch of sealskin with half an ounce of long-cut Cavendish, a silver watch with a gold chain, 5 sovereigns in gold, an aluminium pencil case, a few papers, and an ivory-handled knife with a very delicate, inflexible blade marked Weiss & Co., London. Oh, yeah. Accents are... everyone thinks they don't have a strong accent. Because, if that's all you've heard your whole life, you don't think it's an accent at all. But the more you get to travel and the more people you meet, the more you realize that, even within one city, people can have wildly different accents. I really admire people who narrate audiobooks. I've been listening recently whenever I go, take a walk. I've just been working my way back through the Wheel of Time series in audiobook format. I've read the books before, but this time I'm going through and listening to them. They have 2 narrators that narrate all 14 books in the series, and they do such an incredible job both with narration and character voices. Really, really remarkable. So people who do that have my immense respect. Also, the books are terrifically long, so it must take them a long time to record those, because we're talking like these audiobooks are 30 to 40 hours. I can only imagine how many days that must take in recording sections. They really are. And that's come... So audiobooks are something that I find very, very interesting, because there's something, that their original purpose was for accessibility of stories and culture and news for the, blind, for people who couldn't read for whatever reason, usually because they were sightless. Oh, yes. And, the earliest audiobooks were really very, very short, because they were on 78 RPM records, and those really could only hold about 5 minutes of audio. Even, the largest discs that they made would hold maybe 7 minutes. And that's not a lot. As technology improved, records could be slower. So eventually you would start to get, for a time in the 60s into the 70s, 16 and 2/3 RPM records, half the speed of a normal 33 RPM long playing record. Half speed, 16 RPM records were popular for a time. And I actually have a few, and they are Sherlock Holmes stories. They're condensed a little bit to fit 1 hour on each side. But, that was really the start of them. And then from the 60s through to the early 90s, there's the American Library Association, or something along those lines, were responsible for the production and distribution of custom-made record players for libraries to use that could run as slow as 8 RPM to hold audiobooks. on flexible plastic discs. And the discs have Braille imprinted on them instead of a paper label, so that blind people can see, okay, this is the book that I'm reading. The player itself has Braille on it, and you place it on, and it runs extremely slowly, 8 RPM, and can fit well over an hour of audio per side. I have one of those players. I bought one broken a few years ago, fixed it up, and I have one full audiobook. Yeah, no, I enjoy going on these little asides, Nicolas Cage. But I have the 1979 Stephen King novel, The Dead Zone, on 8 RPM flexi disc. It's quite a novelty. Yeah, dead as a doornail. And then with the advent of tape, cassette tape, audiobooks started to really find a mass market beyond just being an accessibility tool, because cassettes were cheap to manufacture and they could easily be made to run, at half speed, so you could fit 2 to 3 hours of audio on a single standard cassette if you had the right player for it. But it was really with the advent of, cheap CDs, and now with streaming, that audiobooks have become something that is mass market and ubiquitous. Yeah, it's really interesting seeing, the way audiobooks evolved from basically an accessibility tool to now just another form of mass entertainment. I think I know more people who get their books in audio format than people who get their books in print to read. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think being read to is actually a wonderful way to understand and retain the material you're hearing. I know personally, I do a lot of my reading pretty late at night. I'll sit up in bed for a half hour or an hour or so most nights, reading a book. But when I start to fall asleep, I will find myself reading the same paragraph over and over again, and that's when I know, okay, Bloom, put the book down and go to sleep. They do. Though I find that when I listen to an audiobook, if it's fiction, I can listen to it while doing something else, like going for a walk or, in the car. If it's nonfiction, I prefer to listen more actively. Absolutely, Nanara. Poetry, especially, unless it's poetry that requires, the visual layout of the page, like E.E. Cummings poetry. Oh yeah, podcasts are perfect for that, ZSX. But most poetry was meant to be read out loud. It thrives on being read out loud. I implore people, when they read poetry, read it out loud to yourself. You will enjoy it so much more. You'll understand it better. Even things like this, like Sherlock Holmes. It's not so old. The 1890s aren't that foreign in terms of the language they use, but there are some, words and phrases that might sound a little strange to us. But if you slow yourself down by reading it out loud, it becomes a lot easier to follow. At least that's how I feel about it. Office ladies. I'll have to look that up. Oh yes, but we've just gotten the contents of poor dead John Straker's pockets. This is a very singular knife, said Holmes, lifting it up and examining it minutely. I presume, as I see bloodstains upon it, that it is the one which was found in the dead man's grasp. Watson, this knife is surely in your line. It is what we call a cataract knife, said I. Oh yeah. No, Joyce's... So, Nanara, Ulysses is the book that I have the strongest love-hate relationship with it possible. I wrote my thesis on Ulysses. Well, not on Ulysses, just on Joyce. I actually set Joyce's collection of poetry, his first published work, Chamber Music, the collection of 36 poems, I set them to music as lyrics. I wrote the music for them. Because in my opinion, they were always meant to be sung, not just read out loud. When Joyce tried to write poetry, he wrote lyrics, and when he tried to write prose, he wrote poetry. Ulysses itself, instead of page numbers, the lines are delineated. It has line number rather than pagination. Sorry, I have like 3 copies of Ulysses on the shelf over here next to me. I have a strong relationship with that book. Oh, what was I thinking? But yes, when you hear it out loud, especially when you hear recordings of Joyce himself reading from it, it all makes so much more sense because it was the first real stream of consciousness writing that anyone had ever done. Completely revolutionary book. It is my favorite and least favorite book at the same time. I have I have many strong emotions about James Joyce, including that I will never, ever read Finnegan's Wake. It's not worth it. It is not worth it. If you don't know Finnegan's Wake, class, I would advise you look it up so you can just... You know what? I will read you the first lines of Finnegan's Wake if I can. Because it's not words. It's made up. And I do really mean that. Joyce essentially wrote the entirety of the novel, if you can call it a novel, in an idiosyncratic language that really only he understands. So it just starts in the middle of a sentence. River run past Eve and Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by commodious vicus of recirculation back to Howth Castle and environs. Sir Tristram, the Lord de Moors, for over the short sea, had passing co re-arrived from North Armorica on this side of the scraggy isthmus of Europe Minor to wielder fight his peninsulate war, nor had Topsawyer's rocks by the Okanee exaggerated them sealed to Lawrence County Gorgios while they went doubling their mumper all the time, nor a voice from a fire bellowseed mish at talful of Thurpreacht, not yet though Venesoon after had a kid scad, but in the bland old Isaac, not yet the walls fair in Venessi or the Sosi Sethers wroth with Twone Nathan Joe, wrought a peck of paws malt had gemmer shin bruised by arc-like and rory end to the Regan brow was to be seen ringsome on the aqua face. Those aren't words. Those really aren't words. It's even past stream of consciousness writing, Nanara. It's pretty much all... Yeah. I mean, the stream of consciousness in Ulysses makes sense in that it's still words. I'm going to copy into chat what I was just saying. Oh, reach the character limit. Let's see. Just so you can see what I was just reading out. They're not words. It's complete nonsense. And the entire book is like that. It's... Some people, critics who swear by the book say it's the funniest thing in the English language, that it's this incredible work. I think they're full of it. I love Joyce. I love Ulysses. I love Dubliners. I love Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. I love his poetry. Finnegan's Wake is not worth the effort. Maybe it's worth the effort, but you would need to devote years and years of your life to reading it. Ulysses, you can get through with some guidance. I mean, you can get through it without guidance. It just takes a lot of work, and you have to go very slowly and read it deliberately and out loud. Finnegan's Wake is not like that. It's not something that I personally am willing to put that amount of work into. I'm sure it's rewarding for the people who do, just not for me. By contrast, look how easy Sherlock Holmes is. It is what we call a cataract knife, said I. I thought so. A very delicate blade devised for very delicate work. A strange thing for a man to carry with him upon a rough expedition, especially as it would not shut in his pocket. The tip was guarded by a disc of cork which we... Oh, this is the inspector. Tip was guarded by a disc of cork which we found beside his body, said the inspector. His wife tells us that the knife had lain upon the dressing table, and that he had picked it up as he left the room. It was a poor weapon, but perhaps the best he could lay his hands on at the moment. Very possible. How about these papers? 3 of them are receipted hay dealers' accounts. One of them's a letter of instructions from Colonel Ross. This other's a milliner's account for £37.15 made out by Madame Lesure of Bond Street to William Derbyshire. Mrs. Straker tells us that Derbyshire was a friend of her husband's, and that occasionally his letters were addressed here. Madame Derbyshire had somewhat expensive tastes, remarked Holmes, glancing down the account. 22 guineas is rather heavy for a single costume. However, there appears to be nothing more to learn, and we may now go down to the scene of the crime. As we emerged from the sitting room, a woman, who had been waiting in the passage, took a step forward and laid her hand upon the inspector's sleeve. Her face was haggard and thin and eager, stamped with the print of a recent horror. "Have you got them? Have you got them? Have you found them?" she panted. "No, Mrs. Straker, but Mr. Holmes has come from London to help us, and we shall do all that is possible." "Surely I met you in Plymouth at a garden party some little time ago, Mrs. Straker," said Holmes. "No, sir, you are mistaken." "Dear me, why I could have sworn to it. You wore a costume of dove-coloured silk with ostrich feather trimming." "I never had such a dress, sir," answered the lady. "That quite settles it," said Holmes, and with an apology he followed the inspector outside. A short walk across the moor took us to the hollow in which the body had been found. At the brink of it was the furze bush upon which the coat had been hung. "There was no wind that night, I understand," said Holmes. "None, but very heavy rain." "In that case the overcoat was not blown against the furze bush, but placed there." Thank you, certified dummy. Oh, that felt good. "In that case, the overcoat was not blown against the furze bush, but placed there. Yes, it was laid across the bush. You fill me with interest. I perceive that the ground has been trampled up a good deal. No doubt many feet have been here since Monday night. A piece of matting has been laid here at the side, and we have all stood upon that. Excellent. In this bag I have one of the boots which Straker wore, one of Fitzroy Simpson's shoes, and a cast horseshoe of silver blaze." "My dear Inspector, you surpass yourself." Holmes took the bag, and descending into the hollow, he pushed the matting into a more central position. Then, stretching himself upon the face and leaning his chin upon his hands, he made a careful study of the trampled mud in front of him. "Hullo!" said he suddenly. "What's this?" It was a wax vesta half burned, which was so coated with mud that it looked at first like a little chip of wood. "I cannot think of how I came to overlook it," said the inspector with an expression of annoyance. "It was invisible, buried in the mud. I only saw it because I was looking for it." "What? You expected to find it?" "I thought it not unlikely." He took the boots from the bag, and compared the impressions of each of them with marks upon the ground. Then he clambered up to the rim of the hollow, and crawled about among the ferns and bushes. "I am afraid that there are no more tracks," said the inspector. "I have examined the ground very carefully for 100 yards in each direction." "Indeed," said Holmes, rising. "I should not have the impertinence to do it again after what you say. But I should like to take a little walk over the moor before it grows dark, that I may know my ground tomorrow, and I think that I shall put this horseshoe into my pocket for luck." Colonel Ross, who had shown some signs of impatience at my companion's quiet and systematic method of work, glanced at his watch. "I wish you would come back with me, Inspector," said he. "There are several points on which I should like your advice, and especially as to whether we do not owe it to the public to remove our horse's name from the entries to the cup." "Certainly not," cried Holmes with decision. "I should let the name stand." The colonel bowed. "I am very glad to have had your opinion, sir," said he. "You will find us at poor Straker's house when you have finished your walk, and we can drive together into Tavistock." He turned back with the inspector, while Holmes and I walked slowly across the moor. The sun was beginning to sink behind the stables of Mapleton, and the long, sloping plain in front of us was tinged with gold, deepening into rich, ruddy browns where the faded ferns and brambles caught the evening light. But the glories of the landscape were all wasted upon my companion, who was sunk in the deepest thought. "It's this way, Watson," said he at last. We may leave the question of who killed John Straker for the instant and confine ourselves to finding out what has become of the horse. Now, supposing that he broke away during or after the tragedy, where could he have gone to? The horse is a very gregarious creature. If left to himself, his instincts would have been either to return to King's Pyland or go over to Mapleton. Why should he run wild upon the moor? He would surely have been seen by now. And why should gypsies kidnap him? These people always clear out when they hear of trouble, for they do not wish to be pestered by the police. They could not hope to sell such a horse. They would run a great risk and gain nothing by taking him. Surely that is clear. Where is he, then? I have already said that he must have gone to King's Pyland or to Mapleton. He is not at King's Pyland. Therefore, he is at Mapleton. Let us take that as a working hypothesis and see what it leads us to. This part of the moor, as the inspector remarked, is very hard and dry, but it falls away towards Mapleton, and you can see from here that there is a long hollow over yonder, which must have been very wet on Monday night. If our supposition is correct, then the horse must have crossed that, and there is the point where we should look for his tracks. So, I think it was because ZSX, if you don't mind a spoiler as to the last story in the collection, there's a good reason for it to be called The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. In the last case in this collection, The Final Problem, Sherlock Holmes dies. Or, he appears to die. Truth be told, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle fully intended to kill off Holmes because he didn't really want to write more Holmes stories, but public demand was so strong that first he then wrote The Hound of the Baskervilles, which took place before that last story, and then afterwards he wrote, he gets better. He wrote a continuation where he reveals that in fact Sherlock Holmes did survive his tumble off Reichenbach Falls, and, keeps on with more stories. But that, I imagine, is the reason for the title being The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, as presented by Dr. John Watson, as they all are. We had been walking briskly during this conversation, and a few more minutes brought us to the hollow in question. At Holmes's request, I walked down the bank to the right and he to the left, but I had not taken 50 paces before I heard him give a shout and saw him waving his hand to me. The track of a horse was plainly outlined in the soft earth in front of him, and the shoe which he took from his pocket exactly fitted the impression. "See the value of imagination," said Holmes. "It is the one quality which Gregory lacks. We imagined what might have happened, acted upon the supposition, and find ourselves justified. Let us proceed." We crossed the marshy bottom and passed over a quarter of a mile of dry, hard turf. Again the ground sloped, and again we came on the tracks. Then we lost them for half a mile, but only to pick them up once more quite close to Mapleton. It was Holmes who saw them first, and he stood pointing with a look of triumph upon his face. A man's track was visible before the horse's. "The horse was alone before," I cried. "Quite so, it was alone before. Hello, what is this?" The double track turned sharp off and took the direction of King's Pyland. Holmes whistled, and we both followed along after it. His eyes were on the trail, but I happened to look a little to one side, and saw to my surprise the same tracks coming back again in the opposite direction. "One for you, Watson," said Holmes when I pointed it out. "You have saved us a long walk which would have brought us back our own traces. Let us follow the return track." We had not to go far. It ended at the paving of asphalt which led up to the gates of the Mapleton stables. As we approached, a groom ran out from them. "We don't want any loiterers about here," said he. "I only wished to ask a question," said Holmes, with his finger and thumb in his waistcoat pocket. "Should I be too early to see your master, Mr. Silas Brown, if I were to call at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning?" "Bless you, sir, if anyone is out about he will be, for he's always the first stirring. But here he is, sir, to answer your questions for himself. No, sir, no, it is as much as my place is worth to let him see me touch your money. Afterwards, if you like." As Sherlock Holmes replaced the half-crown which he had drawn from his pocket, a fierce-looking elderly man strode out from the gate with a hunting crop swinging in his hand. "What's this, Dawson?" he cried. "No gossiping. Go about your business. And you, what the devil do you want here?" "10 minutes' talk with you, my good sir," said Holmes in the sweetest of voices. "I've no time to talk to every gadabout. We want no strangers here. Be off, or you may find a dog at your heels." Holmes leaned forward and whispered something in the trainer's ear. He started violently and flushed to his temples. "It's a lie!" he shouted. "An infernal lie!" "Very good. Shall we argue about it here in public, or talk it over in your parlor?" "Oh, come in if you wish to." Holmes smiled. "I shall not keep you more than a few minutes, Watson," said he. "Now, Mr. Brown, I am quite at your disposal." It was 20 minutes, and the reds had all faded into grays before Holmes and the trainer reappeared. Never have I seen such a change as had been brought about in Silas Brown in that short time. His face was ashy pale, beads of perspiration shone upon his brow, and his hands shook until the hunting crop wagged like a branch in the wind. His bullying, overbearing manner was all gone too, and he cringed along at my companion's side like a dog with its master. "Your instructions will be done. It shall all be done," said he. "There must be no mistake," said Holmes, looking round at him. The other winced as he read the menace in his eyes. "Oh no, there shall be no mistake. It shall be there. Should I change it first or not?" Holmes thought a little and then burst out laughing. "No, don't," said he. "I shall write to you about it. No tricks now, or—" "Oh, you can trust me, you can trust me." "Yes, I think I can. Well, you shall hear from me tomorrow." He turned upon his heel, disregarding the trembling hand which the other held out to him, and we set off for King's Pyland. "A more perfect compound of the bully, coward, and sneak than Master Silas Brown I have seldom met with," remarked Holmes as we trudged along together. "He has the horse, then?" "He tried to bluster out of it, but I described to him so exactly what his actions had been upon that morning that he is convinced that I was watching him. Of course, you observed the peculiarly square toes in the impressions, and that his own boots exactly corresponded to them. Again, of course, no subordinate would have dared to do such a thing. I described to him how, when according to his custom he was the first down, he perceived a strange horse wandering over the moor. How he went out to it, and his astonishment at recognizing from the white forehead which has given the favorite its name, that chance had put in his power the only horse which could beat the one upon which he had put his money. Then I described how his first impulse had been to lead him back to King's Pyland, and how the devil had shown him how he could hide the horse until the race was over, and how he had let it back up and concealed it at Mapleton. When I told him every detail, he gave it up, and thought only of saving his own skin. But his stables had been searched. Oh, an old horse faker like him has many a dodge. But are you not afraid to leave the horse in his power now, since he has every interest in injuring it? My dear fellow, he will guard it as the apple of his eye. He knows that his only hope of mercy is to produce it safe. Colonel Ross did not impress me as a man who would be likely to show much mercy in any case. The matter does not rest with Colonel Ross. I follow my own methods and tell as much or as little as I choose. That is the advantage of being unofficial. I don't know whether you observed it, Watson, but the Colonel's manner has been just a trifle cavalier to me. I am inclined now to have a little amusement at his expense. Say nothing to him about the horse. Certainly not without his permission, without your permission. And of course, this is all quite a minor point compared to the question of who killed John Straker. And you will devote yourself to that? On the contrary, we both go back to London by the night train. I was thunderstruck by my friend's words. We had only been a few hours in Devonshire, and that he should give up an investigation which he had begun so brilliantly was quite incomprehensible to me. Not a word more could I draw from him until we were back at the trainer's house. The Colonel and the Inspector were awaiting us in the parlor. "My friend and I returned to town by the night express," said Holmes. "We have had a charming little breath of your beautiful Dartmoor air." The inspector opened his eyes, and the Colonel's lip curled in a sneer. "So you despair of arresting the murderer of poor Straker?" said he. Holmes shrugged his shoulders. "There are certainly grave difficulties in the way," said he. "I have every hope, however, that your horse will start upon Tuesday, and I beg that you will have your jockey in readiness. Might I ask for a photograph of Mr. John Straker?" The inspector took one from an envelope and handed it to him. "My dear Gregory, you anticipate all my wants. If I might ask you to wait here for an instant, I have a question which I should like to put to the maid." I must say that I am rather disappointed in our London consultant," said Colonel Ross bluntly as my friend left the room. "I do not see that we are any further than when he came." "At least you have your assurance that your horse will run," said I. "Yes, I have his assurance," said the Colonel with a shrug of his shoulders. "I should prefer to have the horse." I was about to make some reply in defense of my friend when he entered the room again. "Now, gentlemen," said he, "I am quite ready for Tavistock." As we stepped into the carriage, one of the stable lads held the door open for us. A sudden idea seemed to occur to Holmes, for he leaned forward and touched the lad upon the sleeve. "You have a few sheep in the paddock," he said. "Who attends to them?" "I do, sir." "Have you noticed anything amiss with them of late?" "Well, sir, not much of account, but 3 of 'em have gone lame, sir." I could see that Holmes was extremely pleased, for he chuckled and rubbed his hands together. "A long shot, Watson, a very long shot," said he, pinching my arm. "Gregory, let me recommend to your attention this singular epidemic among the sheep. Drive on, coachman." Colonel Ross still wore an expression which showed the poor opinion which he had formed of my companion's ability, but I saw by the inspector's face that his attention had been keenly aroused. "You consider that to be important?" he asked. "Exceedingly so." "Is there any point to which you would wish to draw my attention?" "To the curious incident of the dog in the night time." "The dog did nothing in the night time." "That was the curious incident," remarked Sherlock Holmes. 4 days later, Holmes and I were again in the train, bound for Winchester to see the race for the Wessex Cup. Colonel Ross met us by appointment outside the station, and we drove in his drag to the course beyond the town. His face was grave, and his manner was cold in the extreme. "I have seen nothing of my horse," said he. "I suppose that you would know him when you saw him?" asked Holmes. The Colonel was very angry. "I have been on the turf for 20 years, and never was such a question as that before," said he. "A child would know Silver Blaze with his white forehead and his mottled-off foreleg." "How's the betting?" "Well, that is the curious part of it. Could have got 15 to 1 yesterday, but the price has become shorter and shorter until you can hardly get 3 to 1 now." Said Holmes. "Somebody knows something, that is clear." As the drag drew up in the enclosure near the grandstand, I glanced at the card to see the entries. It ran, "Wessex Plate, 50 sovereigns each, with 1,000 sovereigns added for 4 and 5-year-olds. Second, £300, third, £200. New course, 1 mile and 5 furlongs. 1. Mr. Heath Newton's The Negro, red cap, cinnamon jacket. 2. Colonel Wardlaw's Pugilist, pink cap, blue and black jacket. Lord Backwater's Desborough, yellow cap and sleeves. Colonel Ross's Silver Blaze, black cap, red jacket. Duke of Balmoro's Iris, yellow and black stripes. Lord Singleford's Rasper, purple cap, black sleeves." "We scratched our other one and put all hopes on your word," said the Colonel. "Why, what is that? Silver Blaze favourite?" 5 to 4 against Silver Blaze," roared the ring. 5 to 4 against Silver Blaze. 5 to 15 against Desborough. 5 to 4 on the field. "There are the numbers up," I cried. "They all 6 are there." "All 6 there? Then my horse is running," cried the Colonel in great agitation. "But I don't see him. My colours have not passed." "Only 5 have passed. This must be he." As I spoke, a powerful bay horse swept out from the weighing enclosure and cantered past us, bearing on its back the well-known black and red of the Colonel. "That's not my horse," cried the owner. "That beast has not a white hair upon its body. What is this that you have done, Mr. Holmes?" Well, let us see how he gets on," said my friend imperturbably. For a few minutes he gazed through my field-glass. "Capital! An excellent start!" he cried suddenly. "There they are, coming round the curve." From our drag we had a superb view as they came up the straight. The 6 horses were so close together that a carpet could have covered them, but halfway up the yellow of the Mapleton stable showed to the front. Before they reached us, however, Desborough's bolt was shot, and the Colonel's horse, coming away with a rush, passed the post a good 6 lengths before its rival, Duke of Balmoraw's Iris, making a bad third. "It's my race anyhow," gasped the Colonel, passing his hand over his eyes. "I confess I can make neither head nor tail of it. Don't you think you've kept up your mystery long enough, Mr. Holmes?" "Certainly, Colonel. You shall now know everything. Let us all go round and have a look at the horse together. Here he is," he continued, as we made our way into the weighing enclosure, where only owners and their friends find admittance. "You have only to wash his face and his legs in spirits of wine, and you will find he is the same old Silver Blaze as ever." "You take my breath away." "I found him in the hands of a faker, and took the liberty of running him just as he was sent over." "My dear sir, you have done wonders. The horse looks very fit and well. It never went better in its life. I owe you 1,000 apologies for having doubted your ability. You have done me a great service by recovering my horse. You would do me a greater still if you could lay your hands on the murderer of John Stalker." "I have done so," said Holmes quietly. The Colonel and I stared at him in amazement. "You've got him! Where is he, then?" "He is here." "Here? Where?" "In my company at the present moment." The Colonel flushed angrily. "I quite recognize that I am under obligation to you, Mr. Holmes," said he, "but I must regard what you have just said as either a very bad joke or an insult." Sherlock Holmes laughed. "I assure you that I have not associated you with the crime, Colonel. The real murderer is standing immediately behind you." He stepped past and laid his hand upon the glossy neck of the thoroughbred. "The horse!" cried both the Colonel and myself. "Yes, the horse, and it may lessen his guilt if I say that it was done in self-defense, and that John Straker was a man who is entirely unworthy of your confidence. But there goes the bell, and as I stand to win a little on the next race, I shall defer a lengthy explanation until a more fitting time." We had the corner of a Pullman car to ourselves that evening as we whirled back to London, and I fancy that the journey was a short one to Colonel Ross as well as to myself, as we listened to our companion's narrative of the events which had occurred at the Dartmoor training stables upon the Monday night, and the means by which he unravelled them. "I confess," said he, "that any theories which I had formed from newspaper reports were entirely erroneous, and yet there were indications there, had they not been overlaid by other details which concealed their true import. I went to Devonshire with the conviction that Fitzroy Simpson was the true culprit, although of course I saw that the evidence against him was by no means complete. It was while I was in the carriage, just as we reached the trainer's house, that the immense significance of the curried mutton occurred to me. You may remember that I was distrait, and remained sitting after you all had alighted. I was marvelling in my own mind how I could possibly have overlooked so obvious a clue. "I confess," said the Colonel, "that even now I cannot see how it helps us." "It was the first link in my chain of reasoning. Powdered opium is by no means tasteless. The flavor is not disagreeable, but it is perceptible. Were it mixed with any ordinary dish, the eater would undoubtedly detect it, and it would probably eat no more. A curry was exactly the medium which would disguise this taste. By no possible supposition could this stranger, Fitzroy Simpson, have caused curry to be served in the trainer's family that night, and it is surely too monstrous a coincidence to suppose that he happened to come along with powdered opium upon the very night when a dish happened to be served which would disguise the flavor. That is unthinkable. Therefore, Simpson becomes eliminated from the case, and our attention centers upon Straker and his wife, the only two people who could have chosen curried mutton for supper that night. The opium was added after the dish was set aside for the stable boy, for the others had the same for supper with no ill effects. Which of them, then, had access to that dish without the maid seeing them? Before deciding that question, I had grasped the significance of the silence of the dog, for one true inference invariably suggests another. The Simpson incident had shown me that a dog was kept in the stables, and yet, though someone had been in and had fetched out a horse, he had not barked enough to arouse the two lads in the loft. Obviously, the midnight visitor was someone whom the dog knew well. I was already convinced, or almost convinced, that John Straker went down to the stables in the dead of the night and took out Silver Blaze. For what purpose? For a dishonest one, obviously, or why should he drug his own stable boy? And yet, I was at a loss to know why. There have been cases before now where trainers have made sure of great sums of money by laying against their own horses, through agents, and then preventing them from winning by fraud. Sometimes it is a pulling jockey. Sometimes it is some surer and subtler means. What was it here? I hoped that the contents of his pockets might help me to form a conclusion. And they did so. You cannot have forgotten the singular knife which was found in the dead man's hand, a knife which certainly no sane man would choose for a weapon. It was, as Dr. Watson told us, a form of knife which is used for the most delicate operations known in surgery. And it was to be used for a delicate operation that night. You must know, with your wide experience of turf matters, Colonel Ross, that it is possible to make a slight nick upon the tendon of a horse's ham, and to do it subcutaneously so as to leave absolutely no trace. A horse so treated would develop a slight lameness which would be put down to a strain in exercise or a touch of rheumatism, but never to foul play. "Villain! Scoundrel!" cried the colonel. We have here the explanation of why John Straker wished to take the horse out on the moor. So spirited a creature would have certainly roused the soundest of sleepers when it felt the prick of the knife. It was absolutely necessary to do it in the open air. "I have been blind!" cried the colonel. "Of course that was why he needed the candle and struck the match." "Undoubtedly. But in examining his belongings, I was fortunate enough to discover not only the method of the crime, but even its motives. As a man of the world, Colonel, you know that men do not carry other people's bills about in their pockets. We have most of us quite enough to do to settle our own. I at once concluded that Straker was leading a double life and keeping a second establishment. The nature of the bill showed that there was a lady in the case, and one who had expensive tastes. Liberal as you are with your servants, one can hardly expect that they can buy 20-guinea walking dresses for their ladies. I questioned Mrs. Straker as to the dress without her knowing it, and having satisfied myself that it had never reached her, I made a note of the milliner's address, and felt that by calling there with Straker's photograph, I could easily dispose of the mythical Derbyshire. From that time on, all was plain. Straker had led out the horse to a hollow where his light would be invisible. Simpson in his flight had dropped his cravat, and Straker had picked it up, with some idea perhaps that he might use it in securing the horse's leg. Once in the hollow, he had got behind the horse and had struck a light, but the creature, frightened at the sudden glare, and with the strange instinct of animals feeling that some mischief was intended, had lashed out, and the steel shoe had struck Straker full on the forehead. He had already, in spite of the rain, taken off his overcoat in order to do his delicate task, and so as he fell his knife gashed his thigh. Do I make it clear? "Wonderful! Wonderful!" cried the colonel. "You might have been there." My final shot was, I confess, a very long one. It struck me that so astute a man as Straker would not undertake this delicate tendon nicking without a little practice. What could he practice on? My eyes fell upon the sheep, and I asked a question which, rather to my surprise, showed that my surmise was correct. When I returned to London, I called upon the milliner, who had recognized Straker as an excellent customer of the name of Derbyshire, who had a very dashing wife with a strong partiality for expensive dresses. I have no doubt that this woman had plunged him over head and ears in debt, and so led him into this miserable plot. "You have explained all but one thing," cried the colonel. "Where was the horse?" "Ah, it bolted, and was cared for by one of your neighbors. We must have an amnesty in that direction, I think. This is Clapham Junction, if I am not mistaken, and we shall be in Victoria in less than 10 minutes. If you care to smoke a cigar in our rooms, Colonel, I shall be happy to give you any other details which might interest you." And so concludes the case of the Silver Blaze. John Straker was not murdered, but rather killed by the horse itself in self-defense against being made lame for a race. Hey, Hazmat, welcome. Hope you are getting nice and comfy. Certainly looks as though you are. I will be back momentarily, class. I'm going to go use the bathroom and refill my water. So I will be right back, and then we will read another story, The Adventure of the Cardboard Box. I will be back shortly. It certainly is. Appears to be a remix version. I had just put on a playlist of royalty-free classical music, and it's been of varying quality, I'm going to say. But yes, Nanara's right, the dog didn't bark, and that gives away all. That's one of the most famous lines from that, you know, the curious case of the dog, or the curious incident of the dog in the night. What was curious? The dog didn't bark. Yeah. All right, now it looks like we've just got a lot of Bach keyboard works in the background. That suits me well. Though, is the music, has it been inoffensively quiet, noticeable? It's my hope that I can just have a nice relaxing background, though. Let's see. Would you prefer the classical music I've had in the background, or would you prefer something like this? Kind of like generic. I mean, it's wrong to call that generic lo-fi beats, but you know what I mean. Would you prefer the soft classical music, or the kind of lo-fi background? I don't mind either way. Figured the classical music might be more appropriate, but doesn't matter one way or the other. So whatever people prefer, I'm happy to do. Yeah, sound of the piano is nice in the background. And as long as it's not too loud, let me know if it's out of balance with my own voice. Excuse me. Yeah, it is, especially since Holmes himself was known to be a great lover of classical music, comes up a number of times. I mean, there's lots of classical music I would like to play, but it's not, even though the compositions themselves are old, the recordings are not, and therefore don't generally fall into the public domain, so I don't want to risk the entire VOD being muted because of the background. That would rather be a shame. Though I am making a local recording, I do that for all of my streams, but still, the fewer steps, the better. Oh, is everybody nice and relaxed? I know we're halfway through the work week now. Wednesday is... Just think, you get past Wednesday and then Thursday, Friday, and then you've got your weekend. So we're nearly there. We're very nearly there. Hope everybody's been doing well. I know that with where I am, we've just had the clocks change. We have an hour more sunlight. It's very nice because for me it means after I finish teaching for the day, I go and I take either a nice walk or a nice hike, weather allowing. So I got I got home about a half hour before stream starts from a nice hike. And today was fairly mild as well. Winter is finally coming to an end. And as that happens, as we get into warmer months, I am absolutely going to be spending a lot more time outdoors. Yes, go get a blanket. Ooh, finishing a new PC setup. Were you able to get good components beneath Spore? I know that video cards are finally starting to become available again. I had really lucked out when I got my RTX 3070. It was through like one of the lotteries to buy one that Newegg held. Exactly, Joyful Cucumber. Nice, sunny. Even if it's not that warm, just having more sunlight is so nice. I wish that we either, made this just standard time, get rid of the changing the clocks, leave it at one or the other. I don't care which. Just let's stop changing the clocks twice a year. It's a useless relic. Not everyone is a farmer anymore. And even if you are, what does the time on the clock matter? Do your work when the sun's out. It shouldn't matter. Yeah. I mean, I know, yeah, I heard that, Coyote Knight. I know in the US a bill passed the, Senate, I think, to make it permanent, just get rid of it. I know for me personally, nothing is more dispiriting than in the winter, waking up to get to work and it's dark out, and then leaving work and it's already getting dark out at, 4 o'clock. Very depressing. And I know I don't mind the cold in the winter, it's just the lack of daylight that's rough. Or rather, the lack of time I get to spend actually out in the daylight. Oh, yeah. I mean, I can kind of relate to that. When I used to live in Korea, I had to remember that, twice a year, my, American friends, it was a 13-hour to a 14-hour time difference. You just kind of get used to it. But it's super inconvenient. It's very narcissistic of Americans to, DS Raid. Hey, Atlas, how's it going? You came in at a good time because we are in between stories. Oh, Kirby Squeak Squad, hell yeah. Were you just playing a bunch of old Nintendo DS games? Hey, Arts, how's it going? Welcome on in, everybody. Very nice to have you here. Oh. If you can't tell by my hat, tonight I am reading more Sherlock Holmes short stories. It certainly is. The DS is such a good system. I think about this fairly often, where if you could only have one system, the DS makes a really strong case for itself, because the DS library is fantastic, and it gives you access to the entire Game Boy Advance library as well. The reading's been going nicely. We just concluded the case of the Silver Blaze, a racehorse gone missing and its trainer murdered. It was very exciting. Oh, yeah, exactly, Akatsuki. If you could fit out the 3DS with a GBA slot. That would be the ultimate system. I mean, I love the Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy and Game Boy Color library. If you had one system that could do all of it, it's tough because the 3DS has a fantastic library and gives you access to the whole DS library. If we count homebrew, then, just get a 3DS because you can emulate Game Boy Advance, NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, all that on it easily. It's super cool. I remember back when the DS came out, I was quite involved with the homebrew community back then. So, figuring out ways to run, unsigned code, independent code. People made ports of Doom, Quake, even Quake 2, the original DS. And, like a video player, you could turn your DS into an MP3 player. Very cool stuff. Very, very Wild West feeling homebrew community. I like that kind of thing. But yes, Raiders, welcome on in. If you don't know me, my name is Professor Bloom. I am a teacher. I do lots of music-related streams. So singing, recording quartets by myself. I organize the VTuber choir, and I play lots of retro games. But tonight, we are having a nice, relaxed story time. We're going through some of my personal favorite short stories, which are Sherlock Holmes. He's remained a culturally relevant character ever since his introduction in the 1890s. It might have been 1880s. But he's basically never fallen out of popularity. It's pretty incredible. Yeah, I think, what's it called? Seasonal affective disorder or seasonal depression. When people just aren't getting enough sunlight, it can really mess with your mood. Why it's important to try to get outside when you can. And you don't want to be vitamin D deficient. But now, let us continue on with the adventure of the cardboard box. In choosing a few typical cases which illustrate the remarkable mental qualities of my friend Sherlock Holmes, I have endeavored, as far as possible, to select those which presented the minimum of sensationalism, while offering a fair field for his talents. It is, however, unfortunately impossible entirely to separate the sensational from the criminal, and a chronicler is left in the dilemma that he must either sacrifice details which are essential to his statement, and so give a false impression of the problem, or he must use matter which chance, and not choice, has provided him with. With this short preface, I shall turn to my notes of what proved to be a strange, though peculiarly terrible chain of events. As a refresher for anybody just joining us or who's not familiar with the format of Sherlock Holmes stories, all of these are from the first-person point of view of his companion and friend, Dr. John Watson. Watson took it upon himself to chronicle all of Holmes's exploits into stories to publish in the paper, and that indeed was the conceit of their publishing, was that you were reading an account of a story as told by one of the people who was there. Yeah, exactly. Sherlock's never failed to be popular. Prior to the, advent of, big screen film adaptations, he was portrayed over 1,000 times by the actor William Gillette on the stage, which, is where his famous costume really comes from. Also, just imagine that, playing the same character over 1,000 times in stage plays. I mean, Gillette was one of the most famous actors of the early 20th century, though he never really transitioned to being a big film star. He was a traditional stage actor. And American, not British. But his is the, enduring image of Sherlock Holmes to this day. Everything that's come since, pretty much has still modeled itself upon that look. And there have been a lot of excellent Sherlock adaptations. I know, yes, there was a very good series produced in the, it's not Sherlock, it's sheer luck. I mean, pretty much, though. Some of the, Yep, Robert Downey Jr. is very well known for his role. I actually like those movies quite a lot. You know, I know some people kind of scoff at them, but, you know, I like that he was a more physical Sherlock, because in a lot of Sherlock stories, he's shown to be very physically strong. There's one where he takes a fire poker that had been bent out of shape, and he snaps it back into shape with incredible strength. You know, he was a drug addict. You know, Holmes regularly was in opium dens, you know, consorting with the lowest of the low of society. You know, so who better than Robert Downey Jr. to portray that? You know, they are, in a very strange way, very much in the spirit of the stories, even if they're not direct adaptations. I very much like, in the 60s, yes, a very good pugilist. I'm just thinking of the, you know, scene in the Robert Downey Jr. one where he's thinking through the fight scene mechanically, you know, like discombobulate with a blow to the head, then punch in the kidneys, and very cool. Trying to think what else. Yeah, it's a great scene, Akatsuki. It's really good. The 60s saw a BBC adaptation with Peter Cushing playing Sherlock Holmes, and that's very good. Peter Cushing is fantastic, and they paid a lot of attention to set design and getting the script worked out. Yeah, they're very fun. You know, and movies should be fun. Peter Cushing's dear friend Christopher Lee. Yes, there is a Cushing Holmes, and Christopher Lee as well has portrayed Holmes and Moriarty. It takes a special actor to be able to play a character and his antagonist in separate films. Then there was, you know, the modern series Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman that I liked the first season of a lot, and then it kind of fell off for me. What else? There have been so many good adaptations. Great video games, too. There have been all the recent ones like Sherlock Holmes, the Devil's Daughter, I think it was called. I've heard great things about them, but have not played them myself. I've played the old point-and-click Sherlock Holmes game that was on the Sega CD. That was very fun. And I've been meaning to play the text adventure. That was the first Sherlock video game, I believe in 1982 or 1984. I would very much like to see how that one was. So maybe sometime I will do a stream for that. Actually, that reminds me, class, I, with a few other VTubers, have formed a small Sherlockian society. We've had one stream together. I believe we are calling ourselves the VTuber Detainees of Scotland Yard. But it's myself, Doc Pestis, and the Minimancer. So let me actually give them quick shout-outs. Both very engaging VTubers in their own right, but the three of us together have looked at various Sherlock Holmes things and are probably preparing a lecture for either this month or next month on Irregulars, the VTuber Detainees of Scotland Yard. I believe we go by. The last time we looked at kind of the history of Sherlockian societies themselves, which have a rich history of themselves, and then we watched one of the Peter Cushing adaptations. No, Inspector Lestrade is not welcome. He is too much of a fool. No, all are welcome, of course. But it's a lot of fun. So I think we are planning more activities for the future, so do look forward to that. And I know they've both done Sherlock Holmes reading streams as well. So if you are interested in more Sherlockian content, both of them are very worth checking out. I mean, they're worth checking out anyway. But, especially if you are interested in Sherlock. Speaking of Sherlock, Watson is warning us against sensationalism, and that it's unavoidable sometimes when that's just how the facts are. Let's see, what is this sensational case? There is no game, Wrong Dimension. I don't know that game. I feel like tons of games have Sherlock references. None more blatant than The Great Ace Attorney, where he's literally a character in the game, and a very, very entertaining one because he's about as wrong about everything as it's possible to be most of the time. And his stories are greatly embellished by his assistant, who writes his stories in the papers. Very much like this. Let us see, what is the remarkable adventure of the cardboard box? Oh, that sounds fun, ZSX. That sounds very fun. No, Thoden, what is that? I mean, is that centered around Mycroft Holmes, or is it just another character kind of made up entirely, like with the Enola Holmes series? Those books are very popular among the youth. And I can see why. You know, Sherlock stories never lose their interest. But I have not seen that. Oh, actually, I'm thinking... Remember the movie The Adventures of Young Sherlock Holmes? I think it was 1985. Had the first full CG character in a motion picture. It was a stained glass knight. Ooh, it's a Gene Wilder movie. Oh, that's sure to be good then. I will recommend that to the society. There's also the, what was the name of it? It was an anime Sherlock Holmes adaptation where I think everyone was dogs. I'm trying to remember the name of it. You see, what was it called? It was recommended. Yeah, Sherlock Hound. That's it. Yes. Thank you, Akatsuki. That's one that I've had recommended to me, and it looks absolutely wonderful. The animation's gorgeous. So that's one that I should just sit down and watch, because I feel like I would definitely enjoy it. And I miss when everything was hand animated. You know, there's nothing wrong with CG animation, but come on. It's probably just, you know, my age, you know, where I have a preference for the older hand-drawn animation. I feel like it looks special in a way that is very hard for computer animation to replicate. Not that it can't. Yeah, Miyazaki did direct several episodes. It was a joint Italian and Japanese. Yeah, hand-drawn animation is very expensive. And it's not profitable, necessarily. Personally, I am a little disappointed that the upcoming Dragon Ball movie, Dragon Ball Superhero, is a dumb name, is going to be a CG picture rather than mostly hand-animated. Because Dragon Ball Super Broly from 2019 was mostly hand-animated and was gorgeous. Spectacular animation. So it's a bit of a bummer to have the next one be CG. It doesn't look bad, but it's not the same. It's just not the same. The sad thing is, I know at least in Western studios like Disney no longer have any traditional animators on staff. They're done with it. They're never going to do it again. Which is a real shame. Not that their, you know, animated, you know, pictures don't look good, because they do. They're very expressive. They're very nice. But, yeah. So, Nanara, the Dragon Ball Super Broly movie, I believe, is considered canon because it takes place after the end of Dragon Ball Super. I'm sure that will get retconned and changed almost immediately. For me, I watch Dragon Ball movies and just turn my brain off and enjoy them. You know, I'm thinking back to like when I was a kid and seeing things like, you know, Tree of Might, and it's like, why is there an evil Goku named Turles? I don't know, but this is dope. Dragon Ball GT is rough. It's got some things going for it, because, you know, it was 1996, so the animation quality is very high, but most of it's just really, really stupid. Like, even by Dragon Ball standards, GT is dumb, and not necessarily in the endearing or fun way. I can't get through of it. Oh, I believe that. I mean, I remember when Dragon Ball Super was airing, seeing, you know, pictures coming out of places in Latin America where, like, huge public squares were absolutely jam-packed with people watching the Tournament of Power, like, being projected on the side of the building. And I loved seeing that because the amount of hype like that, and you would see like parents there with their kids on their shoulders, and the parents grew up with Dragon Ball as well. Oh yeah, the Pokemon movies are totally non-canon. But it's like, whatever. Oh, that reminds me, I have at least the first 4 Pokemon movies on VHS. Maybe I'll do a watch-along sometime. Just an old anime on VHS watch-along night. Oh, well, it was good to have you here, ZSX. You better believe I still have that card, Akatsuki. I'm just trying to think, like, I can't tell you the last time I saw the Pokemon anime. I know there was a big, hullabaloo a couple years ago when it was like Ash finally won something. Oh, hell yeah. That's better than getting the Mew card if you ask me, Nicolas Cage. Blastoise is my boy. I've always chosen the water starters in Pokemon games. I have no idea why. I haven't even played Gen 8, so I can't say I've chosen the water Pokemon in every game, but every one I've played. Yeah, if Gen 9 plays like Legends does, I will probably have to get it and give it a try, because Legends looks like a lot of fun. I've not played it yet, but it looks like the kind of, breath of fresh air the series desperately needs. Actually, the most recent Pokemon game I played was New Pokemon Snap, and that was fun. It was simple. Was it worth the $60 or whatever? Probably not, but I had a good time with it. As long as, know what though? As long as that, what is it? The grass cat, I forget its name. As long as that cat stays on all fours, do not stand up. Do not have another cat go from being on all fours to being on 2 feet. Let a cat be a cat, damn it. Come on, Pokemon. Come on, Game Freak. As long as we don't have... As long as the little fire dragon dude doesn't turn into another firefighting type. No more. No more. We've had enough. Alright. Pokemon rant over. Let us see. A fire apple? Sure, whatever, as long as it's not firefighting. I mean, we've had apple Pokemon before, and apple dragon, right? So that wouldn't even be that weird. As long as he's not firefighting. That's all I ask. Yeah. I watched other people play it, and I decided, yeah, that'll do. But let's see. It was a blazing hot day in August. Baker Street was like an oven, and the glare of the sunlight upon the yellow brickwork of the house across the road was painful to the eye. It was hard to believe that these were the same walls which looked so gloomily through the fogs of winter. Our blinds were half drawn, and Holmes lay curled upon the sofa, reading and rereading a letter which he had received by the morning post. For myself, my term of service in India had trained me to stand heat better than cold, and a thermometer at 90 was no hardship. But the morning paper was uninteresting. Parliament had risen, everybody was out of town, and I yearned for the glades of the New Forest or the shingle of Southsea. A depleted bank account had caused me to postpone my holiday, and to my companion neither the country nor the sea presented the slightest attraction. He loved to lie in the very center of 5 millions of people, with his filaments stretching out and running through them, responsive to every little rumor or suspicion of unsolved crime. Appreciation of nature found no place among his many gifts, and his only change was when he turned his mind from the evildoer of the town to track down his brother of the country. Finding that Holmes was too absorbed for conversation, I had tossed aside the barren paper, and leaning back in my chair, I fell into a brown study. Suddenly, my companion's voice broke in upon my thoughts. "You are right, Watson," said he. "It does seem a most preposterous way of settling a dispute." "Most preposterous," I exclaimed, and then suddenly realizing how he had echoed the inmost thought of my soul, I sat up in my chair and stared at him in a blank amazement. "What is this, Holmes?" I cried. "This is beyond anything which I could have imagined." He laughed heartily at my perplexity. "You remember," he said, "that some little time ago, when I read you the passage in one of Poe's sketches in which a close reasoner follows the unspoken thoughts of his companions, you were inclined to treat the matter as a mere tour de force of the author. On my remarking that I was constantly in the habit of doing the same thing, you expressed incredulity." "Oh, no. Perhaps not with your tongue, my dear Watson, but certainly with your eyebrows." Oh, are my eyebrows not working? Nope. Come on, eyebrows. Nope. "Perhaps not with your tongue, my dear Watson, but certainly with your eyebrows. So when I saw you throw down your paper and enter upon a train of thought, I was very happy to have the opportunity of reading it off, and eventually of breaking into it as a proof that I had been in rapport with you." But I was still far from satisfied. "In the example you read to me," said I, "the reasoner drew his conclusions from the actions of the man whom he observed. If I remember right, he stumbled over a heap of stones, looked up at the stars, and so on. But I have been seated quietly in my chair, and what clues can I have given you?" "All right, thank you for stopping by, Coyote Knight. Hope you have a great night." "You do yourself an injustice. The features are given to man as the means by which he shall express your Try that again. You do yourself an injustice. The features are given to man as the means by which he shall express his emotions, and yours are faithful servants." "Do you mean to say that you read my train of thoughts from my features?" "Your features, and especially your eyes. Perhaps you cannot yourself recall how your reverie commenced?" "No, I cannot." "Then I will tell you. After throwing down your paper, which was the action which drew my attention to you, you sat for half a minute with a vacant expression. Then your eyes fixed themselves upon your newly framed picture of General Gordon, and I saw by the alteration in your face that a train of thought had been started. But it did not lead very far. Your eyes flashed across to the unframed portrait of Henry Ward Beecher, which stands upon the top of your books. Then you glanced up at the wall, and of course your meaning was obvious. You were thinking that if the portrait were framed, it would just cover that bare space and correspond with Gordon's picture over there." "You have followed me wonderfully," I exclaimed. "So far I could hardly have gone astray. But now your thoughts went back to Beecher, and you have looked hard across as if you were studying the character in his features. Then your eyes ceased to pucker, but you continued to look across, and your face was thoughtful. You were recalling the incidents of Beecher's career. I was well aware that you could not do this without thinking of the mission for which he undertook on behalf of the North at the time of the Civil War, for I remember your expressing your passionate indignation at the way in which he was received by the more turbulent of our people. You felt so strongly about it that I knew you could not think of Beecher without thinking of that also. When a moment later I saw your eyes wander away from the picture, I suspected that your mind had now turned to the Civil War, and when I observed that your lips set, your eyes sparkled, and your hands clenched, I was positive that you were indeed thinking of the gallantry which was shown by both sides in that desperate struggle. But then again your face grew sadder, you shook your head. You were dwelling upon the sadness and horror and useless waste of life. Your hand stole towards your own old wound, and a smile quivered on your lips, which showed me that the ridiculous side of this method of settling international questions had forced itself upon your mind. At this point I agreed with you that it was preposterous, and was glad to find that all my deductions had been correct. Oh, I agree, Nanara. If I was Watson here, I'd be like, Holmes, are you high? Are you out of your mind? I'm sitting here reading a newspaper, man. I was thinking about going to the bathroom. I would absolutely call Holmes on that and be like, you sound like a crazy person. You cannot tell that from the way I sat up in my chair. It does border on the ridiculous at times. This, I think, is the most egregious example. And of course, Watson, absolutely, said I. And now that you have explained it, I confess that I am amazed as before. It was very superficial, my dear Watson, I assure you. I should not have intruded it upon your attention had you not shown some incredulity the other day. But I have in my hands here a little problem which may prove to be more difficult of solution than my small essay in thought reading. Have you observed in the paper a short paragraph referring to the remarkable contents of a packet sent through the post to Miss Cushing of Cross Street, Croydon? No, I saw nothing. Ah, then you must have overlooked it. Just toss it over to me. Here it is, under the financial column. Perhaps you would be good enough to read it aloud. I picked up the paper which he had thrown back to me and read the paragraph indicated. It was headed, "A Gruesome Packet." Miss Susan Cushing, living at Cross Street, Croydon, has been made the victim of what must be regarded as a peculiarly revolting practical joke unless some more sinister meaning should prove to be attached to the incident. At 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, a small packet, wrapped in brown paper, was handed in by the postman. A cardboard box was inside, which was filled with coarse salt. On emptying this, Miss Cushing was horrified to find 2 human ears, apparently quite freshly severed. The box had been sent by parcel post from Belfast upon the morning before. There is no indication as to the sender, and the matter is the more mysterious as Miss Cushing, who is a maiden lady of 50, has led a most retired life, and so has few acquaintances or correspondence that it is a rare event for her to receive anything through the post. Some years ago, however, when she resided at Penge, she left apartments in her house to 3 young medical students, whom she was obliged to get rid of on account of their noisy and irregular habits. The police are of opinion that this outrage may have been perpetrated upon Miss Cushing by these youths, who owed her a grudge and who hoped to frighten her by sending her these relics of the dissecting rooms. Some probability is lent to the theory by the fact that one of these students came from the north of Ireland, and to the best of Miss Cushing's belief, from Belfast. In the meantime, the matter is being actively investigated, Mr. Lestrade, one of the very smartest of our detective officers, being in charge of the case. "So much for the Daily Chronicle," said Holmes as I finished reading. "Now for our friend Lestrade. I had a note from him this morning in which he says, 'I think this case is very much in your line. We have every hope of clearing the matter up, but we find a little difficulty in getting anything to work upon. We have, of course, wired to the Belfast post office, but a large number of parcels were handed in upon that day, and they have no means of identifying this particular one or of remembering the sender. The box is a half-pound box of honey-dew tobacco and does not help us in any way. The medical student theory still appears to me to be the most feasible, but if you should have a few hours to spare, I should be very happy to see you out here. I shall be either at the house or in the police station all day. What say you, Watson? Can you rise superior to the heat and run down to Croydon with me on the off chance of a case for your annals? I was longing for something to do. You shall have it then. Ring for our boots and tell them to order a cab. I'll be back in a moment when I have changed my dressing gown and filled my cigar case." A shower of rain fell while we were in the train, and the heat was far less oppressive in Croydon than in town. Holmes had sent on a wire so that Lestrade, as wiry, as dapper, and as ferret-like as ever, was waiting for us at the station. A walk of 5 minutes took us to Cross Street, where Miss Cushing resided. Also, hearing Lestrade described as ferret-like, I can't help but now think of Woozle as Inspector Lestrade. Oh, that would be very, very entertaining. It was a very long street of 2-story brick houses, neat and prim, with whitened stone steps and little groups of aproned women gossiping at the doors. Halfway down, Lestrade stopped and tapped at a door, which was opened by a small servant girl. Miss Cushing was sitting in the front room, into which we were ushered. She was a placid-faced woman, with large, gentle eyes and grizzled hair curving down over her temples on each side. A worked antimacassar lay upon her lap, and a basket of colored silks stood upon a stool beside her. "They're in the outhouse, those dreadful things," said she as Lestrade entered. "I wish that you would take them away altogether." "So I shall, Miss Cushing. I only kept them here until my friend, Mr. Holmes, should have seen them in your presence." "Why in my presence, sir?" "In case he wished to ask any questions." "What is the use of asking me questions when I tell you I know nothing whatever about it?" "Quite so, madam," said Holmes in his soothing way. "I have no doubt that you have been annoyed more than enough already over this business." "Indeed I have, sir. I am a quiet woman and live a retired life. It is something new for me to see my name in the papers and to find the police in my house. I won't have those things in here, Mr. Lestrade. If you wish to see them, you must go to the outhouse. It was a small shed in the narrow garden which ran behind the house. Lestrade went in and brought out a yellow cardboard box, with a piece of brown paper and some string. There was a bench at the end of the path, and we all sat down while Holmes examined, one by one, the articles which Lestrade had handed to him. "This string is exceedingly interesting," he remarked, holding it up to the light and sniffing at it. "What do you make of the string, Lestrade?" "It has been tarred." "Precisely. It is a piece of tarred twine. You have also no doubt remarked that Miss Cushing has cut the cord with the scissors, as can be seen by the double fray on each side. This is of importance." "I cannot see the importance," said Lestrade. "The importance lies in the fact that the knot is left intact, and that this knot is of a peculiar character." "It is very neatly tied. I had already made a note to that effect," said Lestrade complacently. "Hello, Elizagator. Welcome in, Raiders. What were you up to?" "Welcome, welcome. For those of you just joining, my name is Professor Bloom. I am a teacher. I do lots and lots of music-related streams." "Oh, wonderful. You were singing." "I do lots of music streams." "Oh, and thank you very much for the follow." As you can hear, that chorus of hellos is 4 of me singing I Record Barbershop Quartets by myself. Welcome, Affrontra. I also organize a VTuber choir. Hey, thank you very much for following. Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. So I've organized a VTuber choir and plan to do more of that in the future, where I take other VTubers and help teach them classical music. That is one of my jobs. I do work as a professional singer. But tonight, we are having a nice relaxing reading stream with some Sherlock Holmes. Other things I do, I play lots of retro games on stream. Thank you, Hazmat. And I play all on original hardware, so I've got my, trusty original NES, Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, etc. And I play lots of boomer shooters, mostly just Doom 2 and custom Doom 2 megawatts. Yeah, so thank you very much for stopping by. What kind of singing were you doing? I'm very glad you decided to stop by. Excuse me. Normally, this is not my usual hat, but I've donned it tonight for the Sherlock Holmes. Because we are reading, right now, The Adventure of the Cardboard Box. Oh, nice. It's so much fun to share songs you love with other people. Let's see, Hazmat, would you like me to... Yeah, I can double hat. Give me just a moment. We will double hat. Oh, hold on. There we go. Maybe a little smaller. Yeah, there's our double hat. Thank you, Hazmat. Yes. This is my usual hat, but I can just pop the deerstalker on top. I'm a man of many hats. There's in fact one more I could put on, but I will leave that off because we are not shooting demons and ripping and tearing tonight. Let's see. Where was I? Oh, yes. So, Sherlock Holmes and Mr. John Watson have gone down to Croydon to talk to a Miss Cushing who received a grisly package in the post. A box full of coarse salt with 2 severed human ears in it. And they're at a loss as to how they got there. Or rather, who sent them. So right now, Holmes is talking to Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard to see what they can make of the package. We're right at the start of the story, so you've not missed much. Apart from Holmes doing an absolutely ridiculous deduction to try to figure out what Watson was thinking just by his face. All a bit much, if I'm honest. But let's see. Yes, Sherlock has taken the package and says, "This string is exceedingly interesting," he remarked, holding it up to the light and sniffing at it. "What do you make of this string, Lestrade?" "It has been tarred." "Precisely. It is a piece of tarred twine. You have also, no doubt, remarked that Miss Cushing has cut the cord with the scissors, as can be seen by the double fray on each side. This is of importance." "I cannot see the importance," said Lestrade. "The importance lies in the fact that the knot is left intact, and that this knot is of a peculiar character. It is very neat— oh, this is Lestrade. It is very neatly tied. I have already made a note to that effect," said Lestrade complacently. Yeah, exactly. Donora, if you've played The Great Ace Attorney, which is a Phoenix Wright spin-off that takes place in, like Meiji-era Japan, Japan opening up to the world, there is literally Sherlock Holmes in the game, localized as Herlock Sholmes, who makes completely ridiculous deductions at the scene of the crime and gets literally everything wrong. It's very funny. But yes. "So much for the string, then," said Holmes, smiling. "Now for the box wrapper. Brown paper with a distinct smell of coffee. What, did you not observe it? I think there can be no doubt of it. Address printed in rather straggling characters. Miss S. Cushing, Cross Street, Croydon. Done with a broad-pointed pen, probably a J, and with very inferior ink. The word Croydon has been originally spelled with an I, which has been changed to Y. The parcel was directed, then, by a man— the printing is distinctly masculine— of limited education and unacquainted with the town of Croydon. So far, so good. The box is a yellow half-pound honeydew box with nothing distinctive save 2 thumb marks at the left bottom corner. It is filled with rough salt of the quality used for preserving hides and other of the coarser commercial purposes, and embedded in it are these very singular enclosures." He took out the 2 ears as he spoke, and laying a board across his knee, he examined them minutely, while Lestrade and I, bending forward on each side of him, glanced alternately at the dreadful relics and at the thoughtful, eager face of our companion. Finally, he returned them to the box once more and sat for a while in deep meditation. "You have observed, of course," said he at last, "that the ears are not a pair." "Yes, I have noticed that. But if this were the practical joke of some students from the dissecting rooms, it would be as easy for them to send 2 odd ears as a pair." "Precisely. But this is not a practical joke." "You are sure of it?" "The presumption is strongly against it. Bodies in the dissecting rooms are injected with preservative fluid. These ears bear no signs of this. They are fresh, too. They have been cut off with a blunt instrument, which would hardly happen if a student had done it. Again, carbolic or rectified spirits would be the preservatives which would suggest themselves to the medical mind, certainly not rough salt. I repeat that there is no practical joke here, but we are investigating a serious crime." A vague thrill ran through me as I listened to my companion's words, and saw the stern gravity which had hardened his features. This brutal preliminary seemed to shadow forth some strange and inexplicable horror in the background. Lestrade, however, shook his head like a man who is only half convinced. There are objections to the joke theory, no doubt," said he, "but there are much stronger reasons against the other. We know that this woman has led a most quiet and respectable life at Penge and here for the last 20 years. She has hardly been away from her home for a day during that time. Why on earth, then, should any criminal send her the proofs of his guilt, especially as, unless she is a most consummate actress, she understands quite as little of the matter as we do?" "That is the problem which we have to solve," Holmes answered, "and for my part, I shall set about it by presuming that my reasoning is correct, and that a double murder has been committed. One of these ears is a woman's, small, finely formed, and pierced for an earring. The other is a man's, sunburned, discolored, and also pierced for an earring. These 2 people are presumably dead, or we should have heard their story before now. Today is Friday. The packet was posted on Thursday morning. The tragedy then occurred on Wednesday or Tuesday or earlier. If the 2 people were murdered, who but their murderer would have sent this sign of his work to Miss Cushing? We may take it that the sender of the packet is the man whom we want, but he must have some strong reason for sending Miss Cushing this packet. What reason, then? It must have been to tell her that the deed was done, or to pain her, perhaps. But in that case she knows who it is. Does she know? I doubt it. If she knew, why should she call the police in? She might have buried the ears, and no one would have been the wiser. That is what she would have done if she wished to shield the criminal. But if she does not wish to shield him, she would give his name. There is a tangle here which needs straightening out. He had been talking in a high, quick voice, staring blankly up over the garden fence, but now he sprang briskly to his feet and walked towards the house. "I have a few questions to ask Miss Cushing," said he. "In that case I may leave you here," said Lestrade, "for I have another small business on hand. I think that I have nothing further to learn from Miss Cushing. You will find me at the police station." "We shall look in on our way to the train," answered Holmes. A moment later, he and I were back in the front room, where the impassive lady was still quietly working away at her antimacassar. That's some... I must admit, I don't know that word. I believe it to be a sewing-related thing. A piece of cloth put over the back of a chair to protect it from grease or dirt. Antimacassar. All right, I have learned a new word today. I'm sure that I looked this up as a kid when I read this story. My experience with Sherlock Holmes starts probably when I was about 10 years old, seeing an old book on my father's bookshelf, which had belonged to his father, and it was the complete works of, the complete adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So surely I have read and looked up that word before, and it did not stay in my mind, because it is not a word that comes up often. Maybe I should bring that back. The next time I put a cloth over the back of a chair, I will say, "I have put my antimacassar on the back of the chair," so that we may remember the word. Let's see. Yes, so Holmes goes in. She put it down on her lap as we entered and looked at us with her frank, searching blue eyes. "I am convinced, sir," she said, "that this matter is a mistake, and that the parcel was never meant for me at all. I have said this several times to the gentleman from Scotland Yard, but he simply laughs at me. I have not an enemy in the world as far as I know, so why should anyone play me such a trick?" "I am coming to be of the same opinion, Miss Cushing," said Holmes, taking a seat beside her. "I think that it is more than probable." He paused, and I was surprised on glancing round to see that he was staring with singular intentness at the lady's profile. Surprise and satisfaction were both for an instant to be read upon his eager face, though when she glanced round to find the cause of his silence he had become as demure as ever. I stared hard myself at her flat, grizzled hair, her trim cap, her little gilt earrings, her placid features, but I could see nothing which could account for my companion's evident excitement. "There were one or two questions—" "Oh, I am weary of questions!" cried Miss Cushing impatiently. "You have 2 sisters, I believe." "How could you know that?" "I observed the very instant that I entered the room that you have a portrait group of 3 ladies upon the mantelpiece, one of whom is undoubtedly yourself, while the others are so exceedingly like you that there could be no doubt of the relationship." "Yes, you are quite right. Those are my sisters, Sarah and Mary." "And here at my elbow is another portrait, taken at Liverpool, of your younger sister, in the company of a man who appears to be a steward by his uniform. I observed that she was unmarried at the time." "You are very quick at observing." "That is my trade." "Well, you are quite right, but she was married to Mr. Browner a few days afterward. He was on the South American line when that was taken, but he was so fond of her that he couldn't abide to leave her for so long, and he got into the Liverpool and London boats." "Ah, the Conqueror, perhaps?" "No, the Mayday, when last I heard. Jim came down here to see me once. That was before he broke the pledge, but afterwards he would always take drink when he was ashore, and a little drink would send him stark staring mad. It was a bad day that he ever took a glass in his hand again. First he dropped me, then he quarrelled with Sarah, and now that Mary has stopped writing, we don't know how things are going with them." It was evident that Miss Cushing had come upon a subject on which she felt very deeply. Like most people who lead a lonely life, she was shy at first, but ended by becoming extremely communicative. She told us many details about her brother-in-law, the steward, and then wandering off on the subject of her former lodgers, the medical students, she gave us a long account of their delinquencies, with their names and those of their hospitals. Holmes listened attentively to everything, throwing in a question from time to time. "About your second sister, Sarah," said he. "I wonder, since you are both maiden ladies, that you do not keep house together." "Ah, you don't know Sarah's temper, or you would wonder no more. I tried it when I came to Croydon, and we kept on until about 2 months ago, when we had to part. I don't want to say a word against my own sister, but she was always meddlesome and hard to please, was Sarah." "You say that she quarrelled with your Liverpool relations?" "Yes, and they were the best of friends at one time. Why, she went up there to live in order to be near them. And now she has no word hard enough for Jim Browner. The last 6 months that she was here, she would speak of nothing but his drinking and his ways. He had caught her meddling, I suspect, and given her a bit of his mind, and that was the start of it." "Thank you, Miss Cushing," said Holmes, rising and bowing. "Your sister Sarah lives, I think you said, at New Street, Wallington? Goodbye, and I am very sorry that you should have been troubled over a case with which, as you say, you have nothing whatever to do." There was a cab passing as we came out, and Holmes hailed it. "How far to Wallington?" he asked. "Only about a mile, sir." "Very good. Jump in, Watson. We must strike while the iron is hot. Simple as the case is, there have been 1 or 2 very instructive details in connection with it. Just pull up at a telegraph office as you pass, cabby." Holmes sent off a short wire, and for the rest of the drive lay back in the cab, with his hat tilted over his nose to keep the sun from his face. Our driver pulled up at a house which was not unlike the one which we had just quitted. My companion ordered him to wait, and had his hand upon the knocker when the door opened, and a grave young gentleman in black, with a very shiny hat, appeared on the step. "Is Miss Cushing at home?" asked Holmes. "Miss Sarah Cushing is extremely ill," said he. "She has been suffering since yesterday from brain symptoms of great severity. As her medical adviser, I cannot possibly take the responsibility of allowing anyone to see her. I should recommend you to call again in 10 days. He drew on his gloves, closed the door, and marched off down the street. "Well, if we can't, we can't," said Holmes cheerfully. "Perhaps she could not or would not have told you much." "I did not wish her to tell me anything. I only wanted to look at her. However, I think that I have got all I want. Drive us to some decent hotel, cabby, where we may have some lunch, and afterwards we shall drop down upon friend Lestrade at the police station." We had a pleasant little meal together, during which Holmes would talk about nothing but violins, narrating with great exultation how he had purchased his own Stradivarius, which was worth at least 500 guineas, at a Jew broker's in Tottenham Court Road for 55 shillings. This led him to Paganini, and we sat for an hour over a bottle of claret while he told me anecdote after anecdote of that extraordinary man. The afternoon was far advanced, and the hot glare had softened into a mellow glow before we found ourselves at the police station. Lestrade was waiting for us at the door. "A telegram for you, Mr. Holmes," said he. "Ha! It is the answer." He tore it open, glanced his eyes over it, and crumpled it into his pocket. "That's all right," said he. "Have you found out anything?" "I have found out everything." "What?" Lestrade stared at him in amazement. "You are joking." "I was never more serious in my life. A shocking crime has been committed, and I think I have now laid bare every detail of it." "And the criminal?" Holmes scribbled a few words upon the back of one of his visiting cards and threw it over to Lestrade. "That is the name," he said. "Cannot effect an arrest until tomorrow night at the earliest. I should prefer that you do not mention my name at all in connection with the case, as I choose to be only associated with those crimes which present some difficulty in their solution. Come on, Watson." We strode off together to the station, leaving Lestrade still staring with a delighted face at the card which Holmes had thrown him. "The case," said Sherlock Holmes as we chatted over our cigars that night in our rooms at Baker Street, "is one where, as in the investigations which you have chronicled under the names of A Study in Scarlet and of The Sign of 4, we have been compelled to reason backward from effects to causes. I have written to Lestrade, asking him to supply us with the details which are now wanting, and which he will only get after he has secured his man. That he may be safely trusted to do, for although he is absolutely devoid of reason, he is as tenacious as a bulldog when he once understands what he has to do, and indeed it is just this tenacity which has brought him to the top at Scotland Yard." "Your case is not complete, then?" I asked. "It is fairly complete in essentials. We know who the author of the revolting business is, although one of the victims still escapes us. Of course, you have formed your own conclusions?" I presume that this Jim Browner, the steward of a Liverpool boat, is the man whom you suspect? Oh, it is more than a suspicion. And yet I cannot see anything save very vague indications. On the contrary, to my mind, nothing could be more clear. Let me run over the principal steps. We approached the case, you remember, with an absolutely blank mind, which is always an advantage. We had formed no theories. We were simply there to observe and to draw inferences from our observations. What did we see first? A very placid and respectable lady, who seemed quite innocent of any secret, and a portrait which showed me that she had 2 younger sisters. It instantly flashed across my mind that the box might have been meant for one of these. I set the idea aside as one which could be disproved or confirmed at our leisure. Then we went to the garden, as you remember, and we saw the very singular contents of the little yellow box. The string was of the quality which is used by sailmakers aboard ship, and at once a whiff of the sea was perceptible in our investigation. When I observed that the knot was one which is popular with sailors, that the parcel had been posted at a port, and that the male ear was pierced for an earring, which is so much more common among sailors than landsmen, I was quite certain that all actors in the tragedy were to be found among our seafaring classes. When I came to examine the address of the packet, I observed that it was to Miss S. Cushing. Now, the oldest sister would, of course, be Miss Cushing, and although her initial was S, it might belong to one of the others as well. In that case, we should have to commence our investigation from a fresh basis altogether. I therefore went into the house with the intention of clearing up this point. I was about to assure Miss Cushing that I was convinced a mistake had been made when you may remember that I came suddenly to a stop. The fact was that I had just seen something which filled me with surprise, and at the same time narrowed the field of our inquiry immensely. As a medical man, you are aware, Watson, that there is no part of the body which varies so much as the human ear. Each ear is as a rule quite distinctive and differs from all other ones. In last year's Anthropological Journal, you will find 2 short monographs from my pen upon the subject. I had therefore examined the ears in the box with the eyes of an expert, and had carefully noted their anatomical peculiarities. Imagine my surprise then when looking at Miss Cushing I perceived that her ear corresponded exactly with the female ear which I had just inspected. The matter was entirely beyond coincidence. There was the same shortening of the pinna, the same broad curve of the upper lobe, the same convolution of the inner cartilage. In all essentials it was the same ear. Of course, I at once saw the enormous importance of the observation. It was evident that the victim was a blood relation, and probably a very close one. I began to talk to her about her family, and you remember that she at once gave some exceedingly valuable details. In the first place, her sister's name was Sarah, and her address until recently had been the same, so it was quite obvious how the mistake had occurred and for whom the packet was meant. Then we heard of this steward, married to the 3rd sister, and learned that he had at one time been so intimate with Sarah that she had actually gone up to Liverpool to be near the Browners, but a quarrel had afterwards divided them. This quarrel had put a stop to all communications for some months, so that if Browner had occasion to address a packet to Miss Sarah, he would undoubtedly have done so to her old address. And now the matter had begun to straighten itself out wonderfully. We had learned of the existence of this steward, an impulsive man of strong passions. You remember that he threw up what must have been a very superior berth in order to be nearer to his wife, subject too to occasional fits of hard drinking. We had reason to believe that this wife had been murdered, and that a man, presumably a seafaring man, had been murdered at the same time. Jealousy, of course, at once suggests itself as the motive for the crime. And why should these proofs of the deed be sent to Miss Sarah Cushing? Probably because during her residence in Liverpool, she had some hand in bringing about the events which led to the tragedy. You will observe that this line of boat calls at Belfast, Dublin, and Waterford, so that, presuming that Browner had committed the deed and had embarked at once upon his steamer, the Mayday, Belfast would be the first place at which he could post this terrible packet. Oh, yeah. Not only is he a sociopath, he doesn't care even a little to tell, Miss Cushing, hey, your sister's probably been murdered? Instead, he's just excited that he solved what he sees as a simple case and doesn't give a damn. He doesn't give a rat's ass about a single person involved in it. Absolutely, Holmes is a sociopath. That's supported by pretty much every story. Not that he isn't sometimes compassionate to other people, but it's precisely when he chooses to be, and almost exclusively for personal gain. Holmes is 100% a sociopath. A second solution was at this stage obviously impossible, and although I thought it exceedingly unlikely, I was determined to elucidate it before going further. An unsuccessful lover might have killed Mr. and Mrs. Browner, and the male ear might have belonged to the husband. There were many grave objections to this theory, but it was conceivable. I therefore sent off a telegram to my friend Algar of the Liverpool force, and asked him to find out if Mrs. Browner were at home, and if Browner had departed in the Mayday. Then we went on to Wallington to visit Miss Sarah. I was curious in the first place to see how far the family ear had been reproduced in her. Then, of course, she might give us very important information, but I was not sanguine that she would. She must have heard of the business of the day before, since all Croydon was ringing with it, and she alone could have understood for whom the packet was meant. If she had been willing to help justice, she would probably have communicated with the police already. However, it was clearly our duty to see her, so we went. We found that the news of the arrival of the packet, for her illness dated from that time, had such an effect upon her as to bring on brain fever. It was clearer than ever that she understood its full significance, but equally clear that we should have to wait some time for any assistance from her. However, we were really independent of her help. Our answers were waiting for us at the police station, where I had directed Algar to send them. Nothing could be more conclusive. Mrs. Browner's house had been closed for more than 3 days, and the neighbors were of the opinion that she had gone south to see her relatives. It had been ascertained at the shipping offices that Browner had left aboard of the Mayday, and I calculate that she is due in the Thames tomorrow night. When he arrives, he will be met by the obtuse but resolute Lestrade, and I have no doubt that we shall have all our details filled in. Sherlock Holmes was not disappointed in his expectations. 2 days later, he received a bulky envelope, which contained a short note from the detective and a typewritten document which covered several pages of foolscap. "Lestrade has got him all right," said Holmes, glancing up at me. "Perhaps it would interest you to hear what he says. My dear Mr. Holmes, in accordance with the scheme which we had formed in order to test our theories, the we is rather fine, Watson, is it not? I went down to the Albert Dock yesterday at 6 p.m. and boarded the SS Mayday, belonging to the Liverpool, Dublin and London Steam Packet Company. On inquiry, I found that there was a steward on board of the name of James Browner, and that he had acted during the voyage in such an extraordinary manner that the captain had been compelled to relieve him of his duties. On descending to his berth, I found him seated upon a chest with his head sunk upon his hands, rocking himself to and fro. He is a big, powerful chap, clean-shaven and very swarthy, something like Aldrich, who helped us in the bogus laundry affair. He jumped up when he heard my business, and I had to whistle to my lips to call a couple of river police who were round the corner, but he seemed to have no heart in him, and held out his hands quietly enough for the darbies. We brought him along to the cells, and his box as well, for we thought there might be something incriminating, but bar a big sharp knife such as most sailors have, we got nothing for our trouble. However, we find that we shall want no more evidence, for on being brought before the inspector at the station, he asked leave to make a statement, which was, of course, taken down, just as he made it, by our shorthand man. We had 3 copies typewritten, one of which I enclose. The affair proves, as I always thought it would, to be an extremely simple one, but I am obliged to you for assisting me in my investigation. With kind regards, yours very truly, Lestrade. The investigation really was a very simple one, remarked Holmes, but I don't think it struck him in that light when he first called us in. However, let us see what Jim Browner has to say for himself. This is his statement as made before Inspector Montgomery at the Shadwell police station, and it has the advantage of being verbatim. Have I anything to say? Yes, I have a deal to say. I have to make a clean breast of it all. You can hang me or you can leave me alone. I don't care a plug which you do. I tell you I've not shut an eye in sleep since I did it, and I don't believe I ever will again until I get past all waking. Sometimes it's his face, but most generally it's hers. I'm never without one or the other before me. He looks frowning and black-like, but she has a kind of surprise upon her face. Ah, the white lamb, she might well be surprised when she read death on a face that had seldom looked anything but love upon her before. But it was Sarah's fault, and may curse the broken man put a blight upon her and set the blood rotting in her veins. It's not that I want to clear myself. I know that I went back to drink like the beast that I was. But she would have forgiven me. She would have stuck as close to me as a rope to a block if that woman had never darkened our door. For Sarah Cushing loved me. That's the root of business. She loved me until all her love turned to poisonous hate when she knew that I thought more of my wife's footmark in the mud than I did of her whole body and soul. There were 3 sisters altogether. The old one was just a good woman. The second was a devil, and the third was an angel. Sarah was 33 and Mary was 29 when I married. We were just as happy as the day was long when we set up house together, and all in Liverpool is no better a woman than my Mary. And then we asked Sarah up for a week, and the week grew into a month, and the one thing led to another until she was just one of ourselves. I was blue ribbon at that time, and we were putting a little money by, and all was bright as a new dollar. My God, whoever would have thought that it could come to this? Whoever would have dreamed it? I used to be home for the weekends very often, and sometimes if the ship were held back for cargo I could have a whole week at a time, and in this way I saw a deal of my sister-in-law Sarah. She was a fine tall woman, black and quick and fierce, with a proud way of carrying her head, and a glint from her eye like a spark from a flint. But when little Mary was there I had never a thought of her, and I swear that as I hope for God's mercy. It had seemed to me sometimes she liked to be alone with me, or to coax me out for a walk with her, but I had never thought anything of that. But one evening my eyes were opened. I had come up from the ship and found my wife out, but Sarah at home. "Where's Mary?" I asked. "Oh, she's gone to pay some accounts." I was impatient and paced up and down the room. "Can't you be happy for 5 minutes without Mary, Jim?" says she. "It's a bad compliment to me that you can't be contented with my society for so short a time." "That's all right, my lass," said I, putting out my hand towards her in a kindly way. But she had it in both hers in an instant, and they burned as if they were in a fever. I looked into her eyes, and I read it all there. There was no need for her to speak, nor for me either. I frowned and drew my hand away. Then she stood by my side in silence for a bit, then put up her hand and patted me on the shoulder. "Steady, old Jim," says she, and with a kind of mocking laugh she ran out of the room. Well, from that time Sarah hated me with her whole heart and soul, and she is a woman who can hate too. I was a fool to let her go on biding with us, a besotted fool, but I never said a word to Mary, for I knew it would grieve her. Things went on much as before, but after a time I began to find there was a bit of change in Mary herself. She had always been so trusting and so innocent, but now she became queer and suspicious, wanting to know where I'd been and what I'd been doing and whom my letters were from and what I had in my pockets and 1,000 such follies. Day by day she grew queerer and more irritable, and we had ceaseless rows about nothing. I was fairly puzzled by it all, how she was plotting and scheming and poisoning my... Oh wait, I skipped a line. I was fairly puzzled by it all. Sarah avoided me now, but she and Mary were just inseparable. I can see now how she was plotting and scheming and poisoning my wife's mind against me, but I was such a blind beetle that I could not understand it at the time. Then I broke my blue ribbon and began to drink again, but I think I should not have done it if Mary had been the same as ever. She had some reason to be disgusted with me now, and the gap between us began to be wider and wider. And then this Alec Fairbairn chirped in, and things became 1,000 times blacker. It was to see Sarah that he came to my house first, but soon it was to see us, for he was a man with winning ways, and he made friends wherever he went. He was a dashing, swaggering chap, smart and curled, who'd seen half the world and could talk of what he had seen. He was good company, I won't deny it, and he had been wonderful polite ways with him for a sailor man, so I think there must have been a time when he knew more of the poop than the forecastle. For a month he was in and out of my house, and never once did it cross my mind that harm might come of his soft, tricky ways. And then at last something made me suspect, and from that day my peace was gone forever. It was only a little thing, too. I'd come into the parlour unexpected, and as I walked in the door I saw a light of welcome on my wife's face. But as she saw who it was, it faded again, and she turned away with a look of disappointment. That was enough for me. There was no one but Alec Fairbairn whose steps she could have been mistaken for mine. If I could have seen him then I should have killed him, for I've always been like a madman when my temper gets loose. Mary saw the devil's light in my eyes, and she ran forward with her hands on my sleeve. "Don't, Jim, don't," says she. "Where's Sarah?" I asked. "In the kitchen," says she. "Sarah," says I as I went in, "this man Fairbairn is to never darken my door again." "Why not?" says she. "Because I order it." "Oh," says she, "if my friends are not good enough for this house, then I am not good enough for it either." "You can do what you like," says I, "but if Fairbairn shows his face here again, I'll send you one of his ears for a keepsake." She was frightened by my face, I think, for she never answered a word, and the same evening she left my house. Well, I don't know now whether it was pure devilry on the part of this woman, or whether she thought that she could turn me against my wife by encouraging her to misbehave. Anyway, she took a house just 2 streets off and let lodgings to sailors. Fairbairn used to stay there, and Mary would go round to have tea with her sister and him. How often she went I don't know, but I followed her one day, and as I broke in at the door, Fairbairn got away over the back garden wall like the cowardly skunk that he was. I swore to my wife that I would kill her if I found her in his company again, and I led her back with me, sobbing and trembling and as white as a piece of paper. There was no trace of love between us any longer. I could see that she hated me and feared me, and when the thought of it drove me to drink, then she despised me as well. Well, Sarah found that she could not make a living in Liverpool, so she went back, as I understood, to live with her sister in Croydon, and things jogged on much the same as ever at home. And then came this last week and all the misery and ruin. It was in this way. We had gone on the May Day for a round voyage of 7 days, but a hogshead got loose and started one of our plates, so that we had to put back into port for 12 hours. I left the ship and came home, thinking what a surprise it would be for my wife, and hoping that maybe she would be glad to see me so soon. Thought was in my head as I turned into my own street, and at that moment a cab passed me, and there she was, sitting by the side of Fairbairn, the two chatting and laughing, with never a thought for me as I stood watching them from the footpath. I tell you, and I give you my word for it, that from that moment I was not my own master, and it was all like a dim dream when I look back on it. I had been drinking hard of late, and the two things together fairly turned my brain. There's something throbbing in my head now like a docker's hammer, but that morning I seemed to have all Niagara whizzing and buzzing in my ears. Well, I took to my heels and I ran after the cab. I had a heavy oak stick in my hand, and I tell you I saw red from the first, but as I ran I got cunning too, and held back a little to see them without being seen. They pulled up so soon at the railway station. There was a good crowd round the booking office, so I got quite close to them without being seen. They took tickets for New Brighton. So did I, but I got in 3 carriages behind them. When we reached it, they walked along the parade, and I was never more than 100 yards from them. At last I saw them hire a boat and start for a row, for it was a very hot day, and they thought no doubt it would be cooler on the water. It was just as if they had been given into my hands. There was a bit of a haze, and you could not see more than a few 100 yards. I hired a boat for myself, and I pulled after them. I could see the blur of their craft, but they were going nearly as fast as I. They must have been a long mile from the shore before I caught them up. A haze was like a curtain all round us. There we were, 3 in the middle of it. My God, shall I ever forget their faces when they saw who was in the boat closing in upon them? She screamed out. He swore like a madman and jabbed at me with an oar, for he must have seen death in my eyes. I got past it and got one in with my stick that crushed his head like an egg. I would have spared her, perhaps, for all my madness, but she threw her arms round him, crying out to him and calling Alec. I struck again, and she lay stretched beside him. I was like a wild beast then that had tasted blood. If Sarah had been there, by the Lord, she would have joined them. I pulled out my knife, and well, there, I've said enough. It gave me a kind of savage joy when I thought how Sarah would feel when she had such signs as these of what her meddling had brought about. Then I tied the bodies into a boat, stove a plank, and stood by until they had sunk. I knew very well that the owner would think they had lost their bearings in the haze and had drifted out to sea. I cleaned myself up, got back to land, and joined my ship without a soul having a suspicion of what had passed. That night I made up the packet for Sarah Cushing, and the next day I sent it from Belfast. There, you have the whole truth of it. You can hang me or do what you like with me, but you cannot punish me as I've been punished already. I cannot shut my eyes, but I see those two faces staring at me as they stared when my boat broke through the haze. I killed them quick, but they are killing me slow, and if I have another night of it, I shall be either mad or dead before morning. You won't put me alone in a cell, sir? For pity's sake, don't, and may you be treated in your day of agony as you treat me now. What is the meaning of it, Watson? Said Holmes solemnly as he laid down the paper. What object is served by this circle of misery and violence and fear? It must tend to some end, or else our universe is ruled by chance, which is unthinkable. But what end? There is the great standing perennial problem to which human reason is as far from an answer as ever. And so concludes the grisly tale of the adventure of the cardboard box. Solved rather preposterously by Sherlock, but then confessed to in full by the murderer himself, who is as tortured by what he has done as he thinks possible to be. I think I'm going to call it there tonight, class, because it's been nearly 3 hours, and I would like to get to bed a little earlier tonight than I have been the past few days. So let me let you know what I've got going on for the rest of the week. Tomorrow night at 11 p.m. Eastern, I will be over on Floor's channel for some Doom co-op. We will be playing a profoundly unfair new Doom Megawatt meant to be played on the Nightmare difficulty, so that should be very entertaining. I'm not sure who else will be joining us at present, but there is kind of a rotating cast of people that like to go and play some Doom there. And then Friday night, same time as tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, I will be playing the best Sonic game on the Sega Genesis. That's right, I will be playing Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, which was really just a Puyo Puyo game given a Sonic reskin. So do look forward to that. I am personally very excited for that because it is a wonderful game, one of my favorites, and very, very difficult. I mean, it's a Puyo game. It starts out easy and very quickly becomes brutally punishing. So do look forward to that. I don't have any streams planned for Saturday. I may do a Gorilla stream if the urge takes me. But let's see who we can go raid tonight. Ooh, I think I know who I would like to raid. Let me check that he's not about to end stream. Looks like he's got... probably going to go for a while. I would like to go bring us to another VTuber who does both reading streams and retro games, which is a Lion VTuber, Vaughn Leon. He is playing The Misadventures of Tron Bonne on PlayStation 1, which is a wonderful game that I greatly enjoy. I think it's his first time playing it. So why don't we go ahead and do a raid message of Reading Rainbow. Anyone remembers the old Reading Rainbow TV program? So let us go raid into Vaughn and see how the Misadventures of Tron Bonne are treating him. So I will hopefully see you back here Friday night, class, for some Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. I am very curious to see if I can still beat that game. But thank you for joining me tonight, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Good night.
Easy enough mission. Easy peasy lemon squeezy.